What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto accidentally proposed to every girl in Konoha? And they all said yes. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Life was cruel, in more ways than one. A lonely blonde-haired teen was lying down on the grass at Konoha's main park. The light blue of the sky was painted with plenty of white entities, what people came to refer as clouds. Titling his head to the left. A group of children were playing with a ball, laughing and teasing each other. One of them tripped over the ball, falling to the ground. Even so, another child managed to get the ball and score. His team cheered while the others neared their fallen teammate. They didn't yell, scorn, or tease him. In truth, they helped the boy to his feet, patted him on the back, then smiled and laughed reassuringly. The boy seemed relieved that his friends thought of his accident as something funny. Friends? The blonde turned his gaze to the light blue sky once more, countless thoughts racing in his mind. Friends, something he could think of as a joke when he was a kid. He grew up with no friends, but no matter how he longed for such a relationship, it never came in his childhood years. It was until his graduation at the academy that he finally made a few, the first ones being Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura. Well, to tell the truth, at first they weren't even his friends really. They saw him as a teammate. But with the time they spent together, they came closer, bonds tightening with the passage of time. He smirked. He remembered asking Sakura out on a date every now and then, her response being a good punch in the face or a down-straight denial. He sighed. Well, he could always try, wouldn't he? She was a good friend now, being his teammate for so long and such. And Sasuke was a funny situation too. Uchiha Sasuke, at first, his rival, later on, his brother. Though the Uchiha wouldn't admit a thing, Naruto knew that Sasuke was seeing him the same way. Funny, now that he thought about it, it was as if becoming a ninja practically changed his life, maybe for the better? He ran names through his mind, each person he knew and was close to him, one way or another. Kiba. Always energetic but being an ass at the same time, provoking Naruto to mindless arguments and long series of curses. Shino. Not really a friend, but neither neutral. Shino was someone that you could go in search for guidance at times of peril, since his logic and way of finding solutions was one of a kind. Shikamaru. Lazy. That's all. Yes, he's a genius, but he is just lazy, the world around him being nothing but troublesome. Nevertheless, he could be your best friend when needed, a companion you can turn towards and know that when you smile, he is more likely to smile back. Neji. Somehow the same as Sasuke, in the attitude that is. Neji was a lot warmer person after Naruto defeated him in the Chunin exams, 3 years ago. Yet again, Neji was like a statue of emotionlessness, though he didn't hesitate to let his feelings guide his body when the company of friends was gathered. Lee. God was he energetic. If Naruto didn't know better, Lee was just like him, except the absence of fashion sense of course. He chuckled at this, remembering his younger self, when he was wearing that orange jumpsuit that screamed, "Here I am. Kill me," to any hostile. Ino. Wasn't much of a friend. But again, he had found himself at her flower shop plenty of times. He snickered lightly to himself, remembering the reason of why he went to her workplace. Jiraiya wasn't allowed there, so he usually sent his little apprentice in his place. Too bad the old pervert thought that Tsunade could fall for a few flowers. Tenten. He barely knew the girl. Next, Hinata. She was always kind of weird around him, always blushing and stuttering. A week ago, his curiosity had gotten the better of him, so he silently followed her around, wanting to see if the Hyuga heiress really had a problem or something. Surprised he was, that when she talked to any other male, her face wasn't flushed at all. Not even the slightest, yet she still had a very little stutter and her always gentle attitude. So, was she only blushing around him? Weird, maybe he could talk to her about it later. Truth be told, the only reason he thought about investigating the matter was because that particular day that he followed her, she was blushing like a tomato when he leaned close to her to whisper something. They had returned from a mission that day, and as always he was overexcited, thoughts of long training flouting his mind. Strange, he had many missions with Hinata lately, as if the Hokage purposely put them together, another ad in the "weird things" list. Nevertheless, he finally understood that she blushed and stuttered like this only around him. Strange it was. Maybe she was allergic to him or something, since she sometimes fainted. Yet, he found it uncomfortable of not being able to stay close to her, to lose a friend, so he shoved the thought away. Yet again, how could he really know? Even as he had spent lots of time with the Hyuga heiress, little did he know about her really, for she never opened up, never talked much. The shy kind of person, he guessed. Well, he could always hold a conversation over the matter later, right? Leaving the world of thoughts, he turned his head to the right, and his gaze immediately fell on a small boy, surrounded by a few older ones. Were they bullying him? He slowly sat up, his gaze focused on the group of children. Some seemed to laugh as the little boy in the middle was sitting with its knees brought to its chest and its hands wrapped around them. Naruto frowned. He slowly stood up and walked towards the kids. Haha, you're just a weak little fool. Give up, you'll never be a ninja, one of the older kids said, laughing, sadistic joy in the pain he caused. The little boy seemed to flinch. He looked up at the older kids. It was evident that he was crying, puffy brown gazing at the towering hostels. The little kid was about to protest when a blonde teen broke the circle, an angry stare over the group of children. What's going on here? He asked. The older kids looked up at him, since he was quite taller. Mind your own business, mister. One of the kids snapped rudely. Naruto sent glares at the kid. This is my business, he said, and the boy could feel a shiver running down his spine. Naruto smirked. He could thank Sasuke later for this. The cold tone was useful in a few occasions. Yuha, so you're another weakling like this one over here. The same boy stated as it was the most obvious thing in the world. Though any ninja with at least a bit of mind could see that it was an attempt to hide its fear. A pathetic one. Naruto snickered. Look who's talking, he said and flickered the kid on the forehead, sending him flying towards the wall. He smirked again. Sakura had taught him some tricks she had taken from Tsunade, like the chakra-enhanced flicker on the forehead, a marvelous way of dealing with little punks. The kid, fortunately for itself, didn't smash on the wall, but stopped a few feet away from it. Everyone stared in fear and awe at the blonde teen. Naruto kept his smirk on. Now, if you please, get out of here, he shouted, and the kids were gone in a flash, leaving only Naruto and the little boy behind. Naruto dropped his cold expression and looked at the little kid. A smile crept on his face as he reached his hand out for the boy to take. The little one hesitantly accepted the hand and Naruto helped him stand. Look kid, don't let them guide your dreams. You are what you believe you are. No one is weak unless they let themselves believe it. If you believe what they say, then you will become what they think you are. Do me a favor and prove them wrong, he said, his smile unwavering. Now the little one nodded and smiled himself. Thank you, the boy trailed off as he realized he didn't even know who the teen was. Naruto grinned. Uzumaki Naruto. Believe it, he said and gave the kid a thumbs up. The boy smiled and nodded. Arigato, Naruto, he said and hugged the teen's legs since he was much taller. Naruto just patted the kid on the head, who backed away and left, waving a hand in goodbye at the blonde. The teen couldn't help but feel proud that he helped in the development of a future shinobi. It was then that a figure dressed in a black outfit got close to him, his high collar hiding his neck while his bandaged hands were shoved in his pockets. Looks like the Dobi can give a speech, he said, his voice cold and monotone, yet mock was evident. Naruto grinned widely, knowing exactly who it was. Well, better than not talking at all, ne teme, he said and looked back at the one he came to call brother. The referred person gave a HN, letting Naruto know that he heard his answer. Naruto's grin was wide as ever. So Teme, want to train or something? He asked and the other teen smirked. Okay, Dobi, though we should get Hinata and Sakura with us too. We need him for some partner training, he said and his smirk melted in a wide grin. Naruto only nodded. Alright, you get Sakura, I get Hinata, he replied and Sasuke raised an eyebrow. He thought his blonde friend would probably go after Sakura, since it was most unlikely that he would hesitate to ask her on a date or something. Why's that Dobi? He asked. It was Naruto's turn to raise an eyebrow. What do you mean? He asked slyly. Don't you want to see some pink today? He said and laughed. Before Sasuke could protest, Naruto had already leapt away. Sasuke turned his gaze away from the blonde's fleeting back. He turned around and started walking towards Sakura's house after letting out his usual, HN. Dobi, he thought. Now, why did they want Hinata in their training? Simple. Though Naruto was still a genin, all the others were chunin, Naruto still being low in rank due to his 3-year absence with Jiraiya. So, since Kakashi had plenty of work to do, Tsunade needed to replace him with someone. But why Hinata? Let us take a look at the blonde's memory. Flashback. Naruto walked out of the Hokage tower, clearly irritated. Damn it, he shouted to no one in particular. Kakashi had left for a long mission and now his team would be short by a member. He had to find someone, and quick. Searching around the streets of Konoha for his friends, he was even more irritated that he couldn't find anyone. Turning around a corner, his eye caught the familiar sight of an ink blue-haired head. He smiled widely at himself, already knowing who it was. Oi, Hinata-chan! He exclaimed happily and said lavender-eyed girl turned to look at him as her walking came to a halt, blushing of course. Naruto ignored the blush. It was like natural to her anyway. Hello, Naruto-kun, she said shyly and Naruto grinned. It was so natural of her to stutter lightly. Hinata-chan, I'm looking for a member for my team. Kakashi-sensei is out for a long mission, so we need someone. Sai is also out due to Anbu missions along with Captain Yamato, he said and looked down sadly. Hinata's face immediately brightened, though he didn't notice it for he was looking down of course. That was her chance to be close to Naruto-kun. Naruto looked up at her, expecting an answer. When he realized that all she did was stare at him, he sighed, okay, I understand, you're busy and such. He was cut off as Hinata violently shook her head. No, Naruto-kun, it's not that. I'd be happy to join your team, she said and blushed. Naruto's face immediately brightened. Great, he exclaimed happily and embraced Hinata in a bear hug. The poor girl blushed furiously, her mind going on overload at the feeling of Naruto hugging her. Well, the next thing she did was another one that Naruto thought as a natural thing for her to do. She fainted. He realized she had fainted when he let her go, but her body immediately started falling. He caught her mid-air, just in time to stop a nice impact with the ground. He was surprised at how light she was, as if she weighed no more than a wooden box. Strange, she seemed fat with that bulky jacket of hers, yet he knew she wasn't, not at all. Come on, how could a kunoichi with such grace in movements and flexible body be fat? He smiled and took her in his arms, lifting her up bridal style and moving towards Sasuke's apartment. They would gather Sakura too later. End flashback. Hinata didn't mind leaving her team for a while. Kiba had work to do with the Inuzuka hounds while Shino was out of the fire country, looking for some rare species of bugs with his father. She was so happy that she was actually on the same team with Naruto. Even if she hadn't admitted her love yet, she knew that him being close could at least let her see him more. She still remembered the first time they assembled. Well, at least, they assembled, as she was brought there by Naruto. As if on cue, the named blonde popped out of nowhere right in front of her. She stared wide-eyed as his face was mere inches from her own. And, it was upside down. He was hanging from a tree right next to her. And she was only walking down the alley when he popped out of nowhere. She stared, surprised at his smiling face, still not believing that he was this close. She was amazed that her blush didn't make him sweat from the heat. Naruto, she whispered. That's me, he exclaimed happily and she fell backwards, not from the shout, but from her legs that couldn't really keep her standing from the nervousness that had enveloped her. Naruto looked at her worriedly as he jumped down. Oi, you don't look well. Your face is red, he said and grinned widely. Anyway, no time to waste. Come on, he said and lifted her up bridal style, earning an eep from the girl who instinctively circled her arms around his neck, holding tight on him. He grinned and leapt away. There wasn't any other girl who would let him do that, and he liked it. Naruto kicked the door to Sasuke's apartment open. Oi, Teme, got one, he said and looked down at Hinata, who was blushing furiously and looking around wide-eyed. He grinned. Dobi, can you stop breaking my door? Asked an irritated Sasuke as he walked in the living room from the kitchen. It was then that Naruto realized he almost destroyed the poor wooden object. He was ready to bring his hand behind his head, something he had come to do by instinct, but he stopped himself in the last moment, realizing he still held Hinata. Oh, that. Yep, sorry Teme, he said and walked in. Hinata still blushing in his arms. Sasuke raised an eyebrow as he closed the door. "So, you like her so much you don't want to drop her dobi?" he said with a smirk. Naruto immediately stiffened and gently let Hinata's feet touch the floor. When she could stand, he slowly turned to Sasuke with a smirk. "Look who's talking. Your favorite food is cherries," he said, pointing a finger at his onyx-haired brother. "Sakura equals cherry blossoms or cherries, anyway." Sasuke, HNED, and shrugged, his smirk never fading. "At least cherries are eatable. You can't eat lavenders now, can you, Dobi?" he countered. It was then that he noticed Hinata standing behind the blonde, her face red as ever. He snickered. Naruto was also blushing, not so much though. Hinata was on the verge of fainting and Naruto-kun likes me? That thought was racing in her mind like a tornado. He didn't deny it, so did he accept it? Yeah, anyway. "Where's Sakura-chan?" he asked excitedly, and Hinata felt her heart drop. He still liked Sakura. It was then that the pink-haired Kunoichi decided to come in from the kitchen. Naruto's attention was immediately caught at the sight of his teammate. Hinata studied his every move, as if every step he took towards the pink-haired girl was another punishment for her, another ache for her heart, another pain she had to endure. "Oi, Sakura-chan, want to go?" He was cut off by a fuming Sakura. "No," she stated and looked away in annoyance. Naruto turned to look at Sasuke, whose eyebrow was also twitching. Naruto smirked. "I was going to ask if you wanted to come and train with us, but if you're busy," he said and snickered. Turning to look at Sakura again, she was staring wide-eyed. "What, idiot, what do you think I'm doing here in the first place?" she said in rage, raising her fist. Naruto knew the limits. If he didn't want a punch in the face, he had to stop now. "Yosh, well, since we are all here, let's go," he shouted and burst out of the window, heading towards Team 7's training ground as usual. Both Sasuke and Sakura sighed. "How the hell did you fall for that guy?" Sakura asked as she looked at Hinata, who was just standing next to where Naruto once was. She let out an eep of surprise. Both teens smirked. "Come on, it's no big secret you love him," Sasuke said and snickered. "Too bad the Dobi must be the only one in the village that doesn't know," he said and kept snickering while both girls sighed. "Don't worry, Hinata, he may be an idiot, but he'll find out sooner or later. Just stay close to him, okay?" she said, and Hinata only nodded. They themselves had found out about her crush from their first day of training together. They could try and help her, but the only way to make the Dobi understand was to tell him straight in the face. Well, they could always wait, couldn't they? Naruto sat down, his back on the log behind him. He was thinking. He was glad that he had friends, yet again, this hell that enveloped him. He had worked so hard, he had tried so much, yet again the villagers didn't acknowledge him, they despised him even now. What else could be done? Become Hokage? Again, they would hate him, for no obvious reason. So foolish they were, not understanding even their own reasons. But he couldn't change their minds, nor could he force them to like him. He lived nearly isolated, he was in hell, and it was named Konoha. He wanted to cry, but his pride didn't allow him. Yes, he was in a place where everyone saw him as a monster. Well, not everyone, his friends didn't see him that way. Now that he thought about it, the only ones that were close to him were Sasuke and Sakura. Hinata too, she was always kind and gentle. Now that he thought about it, she was never harsh to him. When he did something stupid, she wouldn't punch him like Sakura did. Instead, she would tell him it was alright. He smiled. She was like an angel in this hell. She was lost too, an angel that his wings were cut, and she had fallen from the skies down here, looking for someone to help her stand again. But his sorrow grew. If anyone in this village cared for him, that would be Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi and Tsunade. These were the ones close to him. Well, everyone now knew about him being a Jinchuriki, but their attitudes didn't really change. He didn't know why, but he was happy that everyone treated him the same. Even Hinata was a little surprised at first, but all she had done was hug him and tell him it was all right. Joy filled him once more. She had the most affectionate reaction. The others could just stare at him in disbelief or say something funny. Maybe she cared? Thrown out of his thoughts he was, when three figures approached him. Looking up, he saw a smirking Sasuke, a grinning Sakura, and a blushing, yet smiling Hinata. He grinned. It had been 3 hours with this four training constantly. Sakura could help them with basic medical jutsu so that they would heal most common wounds. Sasuke would help them build up their speed, since he was the fastest in the group. Hinata would help with chakra control. Being a Byakugan user required one to be master in that area. And Naruto, well, he helped build up the team's stamina and chakra stores, being the one with almost limitless ones on both. They all sat down at the shadows of a tree, enjoying the light breeze. It would be lunchtime in about half an hour. Naruto sat down between Sasuke and Hinata, the last having Sakura next to her. "So, what do you think, guys?" he asked excitedly. Sasuke, HNED, Hinata giggled and Sakura laughed her head off. Naruto glared at all of them, a bit of anger in his gaze. "What's so funny?" It's just. Sakura tried to say between her laughs. Hinata had stopped giggling by the way. "It's just that it is funny using 1,000 years of pawn on yourself, Naruto-kun," she said and continued giggling. Naruto frowned. "Oh, that's it? I could use one of you as example instead of a clone, you know, Hinata-chan," he said and smirked. He was calling her Chan from the moment he asked her to come in his team. Hinata blushed furiously, imagining Naruto using that technique on her. It was then that Kakashi chose the magical moment to appear in a poof of smoke. He had returned from his long mission yesterday, but Tsunade kept their new team assembled, since the silver-haired Junin had work to do with the Anbu. "Yo," he greeted, raising a hand while the other held his Icha book in front of his face. Naruto's sweat dropped. "Ah, Kakashi-sensei, you never leave that book away from your hand, do you?" he asked, pointing a finger at his perverted sensei. "Nope," he simply answered as he slowly lowered the book to give Naruto a look that said, "I'm bored to hell." The team fell back, anime style. Naruto sat up in his position once more, glaring at his sensei. "So, what are you doing here, sensei?" Sakura asked worriedly. Kakashi usually appeared either to train them, or give a mission. Kakashi's gaze locked on Naruto, sorrow taking over for a brief moment. "Naruto, Tsunade-sama wants to see you," he said and looked away. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "See me? What for?" he asked. Kakashi avoided looking at him. "Sorry Naruto, you'll have to ask her yourself," he said and poofed out of existence. Naruto's sweat dropped. He looked at his friends. "All right. Who's with me?" he asked happily and everyone nodded. Whatever it was, they would be there for him. 10 minutes later, they were all standing before the doors of the Hokage's office. Naruto was ready to bark in, yelling and all, but he was interrupted as Shizune beat him to it, opening the door before he could even knock. Her eyes went wide as she saw his friends also being there, but her look changed in one of grief. Everyone turned to look at the Hokage who sat at the other side of the room, behind her desk. Tsunade eyed all of them. "Come in everyone," she ordered and they quickly walked in. Everyone knew that it was wise not to provoke the Hokage's wrath. "It concerns you all anyway," she said and looked down sadly. They didn't sit. They noticed that the chairs usually residing at the other side of Tsunade's desk were absent, but the cracks on the walls gave a hint of what must have happened. Tsunade sighed. It was then that they really noticed her existence, since they were all examining the various cracks spread across the walls of her office. Naruto, of course, was the first to break the silence. "So what did you want me for, Tsunade Oba-chan? A mission? A cleanup? More sake?" he asked excitedly as he bounced around. It took a bump on the head from both Sakura and Sasuke to make him stand down. Sasuke mumbled a "dobi," while Sakura held herself the best she could so she wouldn't send him flying across the room. Hinata was just worriedly looking at them. After Naruto calmed down, it was just then that they noticed a tear had made its way down the Hokage's cheek, her expression, a sad smile. "Why are you crying, Ba-chan?" Naruto asked worriedly. The others stared at the Hokage in amazement. It was rare for her to show weakness. "It's just that, I'll miss this thing," she whispered the last part to herself as she looked away. Naruto's worry grew even more. The others looked between Naruto and the Hokage, probably grabbing a picture of what the whole thing was about. "Ba-chan?" Naruto said quietly. What could make the Hokage look like that? Jiraiya was already gone. He knew his loss was a great strike to her, but what was she crying for now? What could make her? "Naruto, first of all, I want you to understand that I hate what I'm going to tell you," she said, another tear falling down her cheek as she looked at the blonde. Naruto's heart was beating like crazy. What did she mean? He only nodded, no words coming out of his mouth. The others now dreaded every second. Tsunade couldn't really stand it. The council, they want to kill you. She whispered the last part to herself again, looking down at her desk as more tears made their way down her cheek. The council wants what, Ba-chan? Naruto asked. He never was the patient kind of person. Tsunade looked up at him. Kill you, she said, and Naruto did exactly what she expected. He frowned. That's it? Those old hags wanted to do it from the first day of my life. He practically yelled, but his frown had turned in a look of anger and sorrow. Hinata, Sasuke, Sakura, did nothing but stare. No, I mean really, kill you, the Hokage said again, and all eyes went wide. What do you mean? Naruto asked more calmly now. The others were looking between the Hokage and Naruto, practically turning their heads every 2 seconds. Danzo, he always wanted your power as a weapon, but since he sees that he can't have it, he wants to destroy it, she said, fighting back sobs that threatened to appear. She had already shown weakness in front of her ninjas by crying. What? Can't you do something about it? He asked, practically irritated that the Hokage couldn't stop that damn old man. Tsunade shook her head. Danzo has a whole Anbu unit under his command. The council is also on his side, meaning the whole village is on his side. I can't stop him without evidence, and if you stay here, he will succeed, eventually, she said, and all eyes went wide, especially Hinata's. She couldn't stand the idea of Naruto dead. So, what do we do? Sasuke asked, speaking up for the first time. Hinata and Sakura nodded at him and looked back at the Hokage. She just sighed. You don't. Naruto does, she said, and their eyes went wide again. Naruto, you must leave Konoha, maybe for good, she said, and another tear fell down her cheek. Naruto stood there, stunned, dumbfounded, leaving Konoha for good, leaving his friends behind, leaving his dreams behind. What are you talking about? I can't leave. He was cut off as Tsunade stood up and angrily glared at him, tears falling down her cheeks. You think I like it? You think I want my little brother away? You think I want that Danzo asshole to succeed? She practically screamed, now standing right in front of the small group of teenagers. She hugged Naruto tightly. Kid, you have no future here, you must go. Find a better place for yourself, please, she whispered, and Naruto was now crying too, hugging Tsunade back. He tried to mumble, but Tsunade pulled him out of the hug and looked at him in the eye. Naruto, this shithole you call village has nothing to offer you. You must get out here and find a better life. If you stay here, you will most likely die for nothing on a mission or being killed in a trap set by Danzo's Anbu route. Please, I don't want you away, but your life is more important than my wants, she said, and hugged him again. Naruto hugged her back, tears streaming down both their faces. Soon, to everyone's surprise, Hinata joined in the hug too, crying herself. Naruto was a little shocked at first. He didn't expect this. Sakura soon joined in the hug too, hugging the Hokage and Naruto, a few tears streaming down her face too. Sasuke stood at the side for a second. Well, he could wait for everyone to eye him and force him in the hug. Whatever, he thought, and hugged Sakura and Naruto. The blonde teen was dumbfounded for a little. His friends were there for him. They would help him out of this hell, out of this shit that he called life. But his sorrow grew as he remembered he had to leave them behind. I'll come with you. Naruto-kun, Hinata chalked out between her sobs. Naruto thought he misheard, but as the hug broke, Tsunade eyed Hinata up and down. What are you talking about, Hinata? You can't just leave the village. Naruto started, but Hinata hugged him again, for once at least breaking out of that shy shell of hers. I don't care, she whispered, images of yesterday's events flashing in her mind. Flashback. It was noon at the Hyuga mansion, Hinata taking her usual sparring course. Against Neji? Unfortunately for her, Neji was quite a better user of the Juken style, and as such, Hinata lost once more. Neji helped her up after he had thrown her down with his final strike. Hinata had beat him badly too, but you could call it a trick of fortune that he won this time. She was far more improved than before, yet again, her father didn't seem to appreciate it in the slightest. You lost again? How can I hope that you will ever become the head of the clan when you can't defeat your own cousin? I don't know what holds me back from moving you to a branch family and have you caged. You are less than worthless, Hiashi hissed and walked out of the dojo. Hinata was left there, dumbfounded. After all her hard work, her father didn't seem to really see any change in her at all. She did the only thing she could at the moment. She cried. Neji kneeled next to her and put an arm on her shoulder. Hinata-sama, he said quietly, and she looked up at him. Her cheeks were stained with tears as she looked into his eyes, the usual emotionless eyes gleaming with worry. Neji-ni-san, it's just that, no matter how much I work, father always thinks I'm weak, she said, trying to fight back the sobs that threatened to emerge once more. Neji nodded and hugged her. Hinata-sama, he began to take her attention. Hinata looked up at him again as he broke the hug. Your father might never see how strong you really are. But I know someone besides me out there knows that you're stronger than what you show. I just wish that you would be happy. Your father will never allow it in this house. Think of it, Hinata-sama, he said and left the dojo. Hinata was left staring at his fleeting back. Did he mean what she thought he meant? End flashback. Hinata, he thought. She was the first to even think of it, not the other two that he thought even as siblings. What was up with that girl? You could even cut with a knife through the kindness she emitted. But why? Why would she give up her title as the heir of the Hyuga clan, her rank as a ninja, her life here, just to follow him around? Before he could ask, Sasuke broke the silence. I'll go with the dobi too, he stated, looking at Tsunade with a look of determination. Sakura eeped in surprise, seeing she was the last one remaining. Sasuke was leaving? Naruto was leaving? Damn, she was leaving. I'm going too, Tsunade-sama, Sakura said and stood next to Sasuke. She didn't notice the glance he threw her as she stood next to him. Gee guys, why are you doing this? Naruto asked, and everyone turned to look at him. He was still hugging Hinata. She broke the hug and walked a few steps away, blushing a slight shade of red as she realized what she had done. We're your friends, Naruto-kun. We can't just leave you, she said timidly and looked down, expecting him to yell or something. She's right, Dobi. I can't leave my only bro out there to get his ass kicked now, can I? Sasuke asked with a smirk. Naruto was ready to protest but Sakura cut him off. Yeah, we are Naruto. You won't get through this alone, she said, and looked at the three. Naruto could only stare wide-eyed. He turned towards Hinata again, still blushing a little. The blush that seemed to always taint her face. He understood Sakura and Sasuke. They were his best friends. He expected them to do such a thing. Yet Hinata, she was the first one to speak. She was the first to consider this. But why? Why would she leave it all behind to follow him? Hinata-chan, why? He asked. Hinata looked at him confused for a moment. Then her blush grew deeper. Oh no, I have to tell him. It's now or never, she thought, and her blush grew deep as ever. She opened her mouth to say something but the Hokage beat her to it. Hinata has an abusive father who doesn't see her true potential. It would be best if she goes with you, Naruto. That way, she will have the opportunity to become stronger. And for something else, she whispered the last part to herself as she threw a wink at Hinata, who blushed furiously. Naruto didn't notice it, as he was busy locking Hinata in a bear hug. Thank you, he whispered in her ear. She fought hard to keep herself from fainting and hugged him back. Breaking the hug, he didn't notice the slight disappointment in her features, as he looked at his other two friends. Thank you all guys, he said and grinned widely. They both nodded and smiled. Sakura turned to her sensei once more though. Tsunade gave her a look that yelled, shut up, and so she did. The Hokage turned to Naruto once more. Alright kid, I want you prepared to leave in about an hour. You three stay here. I want to talk to you for a moment, she said and waved Naruto away. He nodded with a grin and left the Hokage tower. Jumping from the window. Before Sakura could ask her previous question, the Hokage beat her to it. You might wonder why would I allow 3 of my best shinobis to leave the village so easily? She asked with a grin. The others only nodded as they stared wide-eyed. Simple, she said and shrugged, as if the answer was right in their faces. What Naruto needs right now are friends, people who love him, she said while eyeing them all, focusing a bit longer on Hinata. If he was gone out there all on his own, he would probably die from grief, she said, earning a slight gasp from Hinata. The poor girl seemed to be quite sensitive on this matter. You guys are all Naruto has at the moment. Be sure to stay close to him and help him through this, she said, and they all nodded. Now, dismissed. You've got things to pack, nay? She said with a smirk, and they all nodded once more. With a wave of her hand, they had disappeared through the window. Doesn't anyone use doors nowadays? She thought and sighed as she sat back at her chair. I'm getting out of here, and I'm not alone. Naruto thought happily as he walked down the streets towards his apartment, wanting to take one last good look at the village. He didn't like the idea of leaving it, but what Tsunade said was true. There was no real future for him here. There wasn't really anything waiting for him except the chair of the Hokage, which was like a forlorn dream now. Even if he were to be the Hokage, there would be no one at his side, both from the village side and the mate thing side. He contemplated on this. He liked Sakura, but at the extent of seeing her as a sister. Sakura was a good friend and a good person when she wasn't angry. When she was, and surprisingly, it was nearly always when Naruto was around, well, let's just say that you want to be a good kilometer radius away from her. Yep, she definitely wasn't the girl for him. Next in the list is Tenten. From where did she come from? He barely knew her. Next, Ino? Nah, Ino never liked him, and the feeling was mutual. She seemed to be more affectionate towards Shikamaru lately, he chuckled. Good luck making the bored boy interested. Either way, it was more possible that he wouldn't see them again. So the last candidate is Yo, said a voice, sending him out of his thoughts. Unfortunately, it wasn't fast enough to avoid hitting a pole right in front of him. Crushing on it, he fell backwards and rubbed his face, mumbling curses and many other strange stuff. Did he say something about ramen? Looking up, he realized the voice came from his always bored and perverted sensei. Ah, what is it, sensei? He asked, irritated. The Junin held his favorite book in one hand, the other shoved in one of his pockets. He raised his one visible eyebrow. What, can't I say goodbye to my students? He asked curiously, titling his head slightly to the side. Naruto stood up. Wait, what the hell? Did you eavesdrop? He was cut off as Kakashi raised his hand in motion for him to silence. I already knew what the Hokage wanted you for before I came to the training grounds. And, I was more than sure that Sakura and Sasuke would follow. They can't live without their favorite baka around, now can they? He asked, his eye turning in an upside-down U, evidencing his unique smile. Naruto was laughing while he rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, I guess so. I couldn't imagine life without Teme around too, he said and continued laughing. Kakashi raised his eyebrow again. He imagined the blonde referring more to Sakura, rather than Sasuke. Only Sasuke chose to follow? He asked curiously, and Naruto's laughter was cut as if his voice had died. No, Sakura-chan and Hinata-chan will too, he said seriously. Kakashi's visible eye went wide. Did he mean, the Hyuga heiress? What are you talking about? The Hyuga heiress? He asked curiously, and Naruto only nodded. Kakashi brought his free hand on his chin. You didn't force her to come or anything, did you, Naruto? He asked. Naruto's eyes went wide. What? I would never force Hinata-chan on anything. She was the first to choose to come with me from the beginning, he shouted and crossed his arms over his chest. Kakashi's eye went wide once more. Realization hit him. He smiled once more. Maybe there was a chance for his knucklehead student to find something more than power and cool techniques out there, nay? Very well. Just take care of your girlfriend, Naruto, he said, wanting to tease his student. Naruto was slightly offended as his eyes formed in 0.0. Before he could protest or anything, Kakashi poofed out of existence, the last expression on his face being a knowing smile. Naruto sighed and kept it to himself. What did he mean by girlfriend? Sakura was out of question, since Sasuke was more likely to get her. Wait, Hinata? He blushed at the thought of Hinata being his girlfriend. Reasons? Uncount for now. He shook his head and kept walking towards his apartment. Hinata wasn't an open person. He didn't know her much, but what Tsunade said about her abusive father, he would get to know the girl more during their journey. Another thing to do added in his challenges list. Hinata always was on his weird people list till recently, until he realized that she was a lot nicer person than he already thought her as. And this in only a few training days, imagine months or years. Yep, they had time, and he was going to use it. He grew bored of being alone all his life. Maybe he could give her a shot, maybe she could help him reach out of this hell. Meanwhile at Sakura's house, Sakura hugged her mother tightly. Don't worry, Ka-san, Sasuke-kun and Naruto are strong, they'll protect me, she said reassuringly, trying to ease her mother's fear. It wasn't easy to have your daughter going away, maybe forever, and where are you going? Her mother asked anxiously, her tears dry now as concern and curiosity won over. Sakura shook her head. I'm sorry mom, I can't tell, neither do I know, she thought the last part to herself. True, they hadn't discussed where they were to go. Well, they could always talk this out on the road northeast? She nodded and smiled. Okay, I just want you to write to us every now and then. You can do this, can't you? She said and tilted her head to the side slightly. Sakura sighed. Yes mom, all right, she said and gave her mother a final hug. Be safe, her mother whispered, and Sakura nodded on her shoulder. With a kiss on the cheek, she ran out of the door and into the now filling streets of Konoha. With Sasuke. Where did I put it? The onyx-haired boy thought as he kept rummaging through his clothes. Finally, he found what he was looking for. It was him. It needs shining, he thought as he unsheathed his blade. It was a long katana sword, though the edge was straight instead of turning. The hilt made of thick leather, the blade made of pure steel. It could cut through a samurai's armor as if it was hot butter. He smirked. Let Orochimaru come and take him. He would have to deal with his little friend here first. Turning the camera to Hinata. 0. Oh, where did I get that? The lavender-eyed girl was neatly packing clothes in her bedroom. She had prepared a travel pack meant for a rather long journey. They hadn't organized the travel yet. What the people of Konoha would know was that they went on a mission, and they never returned. If they wanted, they could tell their family with the precaution that they would keep it a secret. Sakura had told her parents, knowing that they didn't deserve to be worried to death. Now, Hinata telling her father, not the most appropriate thing to do. Not that he would be worried, but he was most likely to forbid her from leaving. Not only because she was the heir, but also because she was going with him. Why the hell couldn't he just let her be happy for once? A journey with Naruto, a new life with him. Well, they would also have company, nay? Sakura and Sasuke weren't bad. Sasuke wasn't a cold cube as he let people know. Instead, he knew that he could trust Hinata, thus being warmer towards her. Well, it was also because she wasn't one of his annoying fangirls. He saw her as a friend, and she was glad. She wanted to have friends, though with Naruto, she sought for something more. The only one in her family that deserved to know was Neji. He was the only one in this clan that deserved the truth by her opinion. A knock on the door. Come in, she said softly, and the door slowly slid open, revealing a tall, white-dressed Neji. Hinata-sama, you called? He asked and grinned. Hinata sighed. He played with formality quite much lately. He walked in and immediately took notice of the few packed clothes and the backpack. He raised an eyebrow. Going on a mission, Hinata-sama? He asked, and Hinata, to his surprise, shook her head. I'm going away. Neji-ni-san, she simply said, and packed one last cloth in her backpack before zipping and closed. Looking at Neji, she noticed his wide-eyed expression. His eyes slowly returned to normal, and he grinned. And may I ask, with who, and where? He said. Hinata looked around worriedly, as if she expected someone to jump out of nowhere. She stood up and walked towards the door. Peeking her head out, she looked at both sides of the hallway. It was clear. Closing the door, she went back in and sat on the bed. Neji just stood there, giving her a look that stated all he didn't put in words. He expected explanations. Neji-ni-san, I don't want anyone else to know about this conversation, all right? She said, a tint of worry in her always soft voice. He only nodded in response. She slowly took a deep breath and sighed. She explained the whole situation. They were to go on a mission, while in truth they were leaving the village. They would be marked Mia, missing in action, by the Hokage, and they would be able to start a better life somewhere else. When she finished her part, Neji did something that clearly took her off guard. He smiled. I'm proud of you, Hinata-sama. Though I don't approve of running away from your father in problems like this, it is more likely that a better future awaits you out there. Oh, and I have my own news for you, he said, and his expression darkened. Hinata knew that when Neji did that, it wasn't good. Hinata-sama, I have accidentally overheard a conversation your father had with the elders. I heard the whole thing, so it is most likely that I speak truth. He said and took a glance at the girl in front of him, wanting to make sure he had her full attention. He smiled sadly. They are going to unseal me, he said, but there was no happiness in his voice. Instead, a sad smile crept on his face. Hinata looked at him worriedly. "But Ni-san, that's good isn't it?" she asked half-heartedly. She was happy that her cousin, and close-to brother, was finally going to be free of this curse, but why wasn't he happy? "Hinata-sama, I will be freed, only to become the next heir of the clan," he said, and she gasped. But, if he was to be the heir, then she. He looked at her again, only to see fear and sorrow in her expression. "They will move and seal you, Hinata-sama. That is why it is best for you to seek a new life. There is nothing left here, nothing but sorrow. You must take this chance, go now before it's too late. They will be here in mere minutes to take and seal you. The reason I came in the first place was to tell you to flee. But, I see that you have already planned a better life, haven't you?" he said and smiled. She smiled back and hugged him. "Thank you Ni-san," she whispered. He hugged her back. "Don't worry Hinata-sama. I will change the Hyugas for all of us, for you, for me, for Naruto," he said and broke apart. He activated his Byakugan. His eyes went wide. "They're coming. Quickly Hinata-sama, get out of here," he said and stood up. Guards, along with her father, were quickly approaching. Hinata nodded and took her backpack in hand. Shifting it on her back, she opened her window. Taking one last glance at her cousin, she took off. "Good luck, Hinata-sama," he whispered, and it was then that the door slid open. He deactivated his blood limit. Turning to look at his uncle, surprise was evident in his eyes. "Neji? What are you doing here? Where's Hinata?" he asked. Neji shook his head. "I wish I knew, Hiashi-sama. She wasn't here when I came," he said, fighting hard to keep himself from smirking. Instead, he kept on a cold mask, void of emotion. Hiashi cursed under his breath. He looked up at Neji again. "Anyway, I'll send guards to find her. Neji, I need to talk to you," he said, and his cold expression returned once more. Neji bowed lightly, letting a smirk slip on his lips for a mere second. He already knew what Hiashi wanted. Hinata wandered the streets, thinking of what should she do next. If her father or any of the guards found her, she would be taken back to be sealed. She had to find somewhere to hide until the time came for them to leave. But where was the last place anyone would think that she would be? Naruto packed up the last cup of ramen before zipping his backpack close. He had half an hour until he had to go back to Tsunade, and he was already ready for the journey. Food, equipment, clothes and all the basic necessities were in that backpack. All he had to do now was wait. Too bad it was also the thing he wasn't good at. He sat on his couch, anxiously waiting the minutes to pass. He was extremely thrilled by the fact of this departure. He felt uneasy that he had to leave his village, maybe forever, but the thrill of adventure was filling him. He focused on the good sides. He would be away from the villagers, away from all the hate, free to go wherever he chose. He would be out there with good company. With his best friends. Yep, Hinata was considered a best friend. Who wouldn't want to be friends with such a cute girl? Wait, did he just think she is cute? His trail of thoughts was cut off as a knock on his door was heard. Who could it be? Maybe an assassin? Tsunade warned him that Danzo could most likely already be on the move. He casually walked towards the door. He could feel the chakra signature of the visitor. He didn't try to hide it, so he definitely wasn't an assassin. Anyway, what kind of assassin knocks the door of his victim? Wait, he knew this signature. He opened the door with a grin, only to meet a smiling yet blushing Hinata. "Oh Hinata-chan, where are the others?" he asked curiously as he poked his head out, looking around as if expecting Sakura and Sasuke to jump out of nowhere. Hinata blushed deeper now. I came alone. Aren't they here yet?" she asked, pretending curiosity in her voice. She knew they weren't here, but it would be a nice cover, pretending that she came here expecting the others to be there too. He grinned widely. "Nope, but you can come in, I need some company anyway," he said and stepped aside, allowing her entrance. She stepped in. His apartment was far different than the Hyuga mansion. It seemed warmer. The smell of ramen was mixed with Naruto's. Why wasn't she surprised? They both sat on the couch. "So, you're ready Hinata-chan?" he asked, stealing a glance at her before looking back at the clock. Was it his idea or time was moving slower? "Why yes. Though we should avoid other Hyugas," she said, and that caught his attention. He raised an eyebrow. "Avoid Hyugas? What for?" he asked, and now his complete attention was fixed on her. She started explaining the whole thing. what her cousin told her and what she told him. When she mentioned her being caged because of her weakness, she was surprised that Naruto didn't start yelling around curses towards her father. Instead, what he said made her blush like crazy. "They don't know what they're losing then," he said and placed a hand on her shoulder. She nodded. "Why yes, thank you, Naruto-kun," she said and smiled. He smiled back. Another knock was then heard on the door. As his eyes turned towards the door, he also noticed time. He raised both eyebrows. 5 minutes remained before he had to meet the Hokage for the supposed briefing. How the hell did time suddenly went by that fast? He didn't forget the fact that time seemed to accelerate after Hinata came here and they started talking. He shook these thoughts away as he walked towards the door. Opening it, a smirking Sasuke and a grinning Sakura awaited him. "Ready yet, Dobi?" Sasuke asked, already knowing the answer. Naruto seemed to be beaming. The thrill of a new adventure took over once more. "I was born ready, Teme," he answered back, and Sasuke, HNED. Rushing back in his apartment, he headed right to the bedroom. It was then that Hinata walked up to her newest teammates. Sakura raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing here, Hinata?" she asked, and the named girl smiled while a blush followed suit. Well, I had nowhere else to go. Odo-san mustn't find me, and she trailed off, sadness overwhelming at the thought of what her father wanted to do. "Why's that?" Sasuke asked. Hinata could laugh at the sight of both Sakura and Sasuke having an eyebrow raised. It was just funny, and she couldn't help but suppress it to a giggle. Oh, it surely would be an interesting journey, to God knows where. It was then that Naruto appeared, having his backpack on his back and a weapon holster at his thigh. Everyone grinned. "Let's go," he shouted excitedly as he and Hinata stepped outside. They all nodded and Naruto closed the door to his apartment, locking it for maybe the final time. After a quick 5-minute run to the Hokage tower, Hinata had said to the other two what she had said to Naruto. They understood. Having the caged bird seal would only conclude in her staying here forever, bound by the seal's powers, being forced to live a life she clearly didn't want. She didn't want to stay away from Naruto forever. They once more stood outside the doors to the Hokage's office. But this time, they all had their backpacks loaded and were ready to journey. The doors were shut, and they could hear shouting from the inside. Naruto was ready to open the door when a small hand grabbed his own. He looked at its owner, who was no other than Hinata. She shook her head and motioned them to silence. The voices from the other side of the doors were more audible now. "For the last time, Hiashi. She will go on the mission, and when she returns, you can do whatever you want." The Hokage shouted and everyone chuckled silently, seeing the irony in her words. "I am completely opposite to your opinion, Hokage-sama. I will not allow her to lurk around, shaming the name of our family even more. Neji has proven plenty of times far more suitable for my daughter for the position of the head of the clan. So, Hanabi will be the next successor after him," he said blankly. Naruto was raging inside, but Hinata's firm grasp on his wrist held him back. He sighed. "Shaming? Damn you, Hiashi, you are more blind even than Naruto towards your daughter." Tsunade raged, but Naruto was confused. Why was he blind again? Hinata blushed, knowing what the Hokage meant, while the other two just threw a smirk at each other. What does the demon boy has to do with Hanabi?" Hiashi said, and all 4 teens could imagine the smirk he must be throwing the Hokage right now. Hinata once more was on the merge of tears, knowing what her father meant. Naruto, on the other hand, was confused, but he kept it for himself for now. "Don't fool with me, you bastard." Hinata, she was cut off by Hiashi's curious gaze. "What does she have to do with my family? She is a lowly branch member," he said seriously, and now the poor girl outside the door couldn't help but sob. Her own father didn't even acknowledge her as family anymore. They heard the Hokage scream and the sound of broken glass could be heard afterwards. They all barked in, and they stared wide-eyed at the Hokage. What?" she asked angrily as she turned to look at them. They kept looking between the broken windows and the Hokage. "Where's Hiashi?" Tsunade looked back at the broken window. "Oh, that. Well, I'll have it fixed in a few days. Think I'm going to use it a few more times, nay?" she said and threw a satisfied smirk at the teens, who all shivered. "All right. Now with our job." She sat down on her chair behind the desk and the teens stood next to each other in front of her. She eyed them all, up and down. "Are you sure of what you're doing?" she asked, waiting to see doubt appearing on their features. Too bad, it never came. They all nodded except of Hinata, who was nodding like crazy for a few seconds. Fortunately, the others didn't notice, having their full attention fixed on the Hokage. She must have heard, Tsunade thought and sighed. I assume I can't change your mind? She asked, not expecting an answer of course. They all shook their heads, Hinata having shook her own head vigorously once more. Very well then, there's one more thing I want to ask. Don't let a Hyuga close to Hinata. Am I understood? I don't want one of my best shinobis sealed, now die? She asked and smiled. They all nodded. This time, Hinata was looking at the ground worriedly, as if expecting something bad to happen. The Hokage explained the rest of what was to be done. The village, except those that were told the truth, would only know that they went on a scouting mission, encountered enemy ninjas. The battle raged and the outcome was no bodies on both sides. They would be marked Mia, missing in action, and she warned them that they would have to dodge the best way possible the ninjas she would send to search for them. She would make sure though, that this search wouldn't last more than 2 days. So, ninja dodging for 2 days each? Naruto grinned and hugged the Hokage, giving a final goodbye before the departure. Hinata and Sakura hugged the blonde lady too. Sasuke just HNED, and gave her a smile, something really rare for him to do. Take care of the idiot, she said to both Hinata and Sakura, who nodded in response while Naruto was fuming at the background. Sasuke smirked, bumping the dobi on the head before he could start protesting in his always loud manner. That caused him to turn his protests towards his raven-haired brother, who just HNED in response, making him even more furious. In the end, it took Hinata to calm him down. Sakura, of course, was ready to give him a nice punch in the face, making him stand down even faster. The Hokage was a little amazed nonetheless, that the lavender-eyed girl managed to calm him down without shouting, punching or anything else. She just touched him and pleaded him to calm down. The world is full of surprises. They now stood before the gates of Konoha. A few more steps and they now would exit the village, and maybe never come back again. Sakura wanted to come in order to test her potential on the outside world, become stronger by adventuring throughout it. Of course, she also wanted to stay close to Sasuke and Naruto, they being her best friends. Sasuke needed to go with Naruto, if not only to stay with his brother, then to defeat his older one. He knew that Itachi was after Naruto for his 9-tailed prisoner, and that could make it even easier for Sasuke to find him and take revenge. Of course, it wasn't the #1 priority, but it wouldn't hurt to kill your brother now, would it? Hinata wanted to get away from her clan, get away from all this abuse, get away and search for a better life. Somewhere where she could finally unlock her true potential. Hiyashi always thought that through his way, he would make her stronger. Indeed, he was sure to make her shy and timid side even stronger, taking away all her confidence, making her think she was weak, a nobody. The other reason she came, was that she wanted to follow him. Him being the boulder that helped her stand when others would force her to fall. Him being one of the few that believed in her. If he was gone, from where could she hold herself? From where could she drain the power she needed to stand before she would manage to find her own? Her teacher and teammates could help, but not the way he did, not that way. Naruto was finally going to get free. He wouldn't have to meet glares of anger and distaste everywhere he went. He wouldn't have to endure the villagers' false hate anymore. He would venture outside, venture and become stronger, in more ways than one. And he would do it, with his friends by his side. A lonely figure waited hidden in the leaves of a nearby tree, watching the teenagers preparing to leave the village. They were talking to each other, the blonde of the group shouting something about ramen. He smirked under the shadows. It has began, and with that, he became one with the shadows. The tapping of feet could be heard on the hard tiles of the furnished floor. The hallway seemed to go to no end, no door being to either left or right of the dark corridor. The way was enlightened by torches, amazingly hanging from the rooftop off what seemed to be nothing. The sounds of steps off the floor came to a halt as the figure dressed in a pitch-black robe stood before the only door of this hallway. Raising his gloved hand, it found its way to the knob. Turning it, the door was cracked open, slowly sliding the whole way towards the wall. Inside the room was a lonely desk, a wooden chair being noticeable behind it. The rest of the room was made out of stone, the floor being only dirt, a big difference between the previously tiled and furnished floor of the hallway. The dark-dressed figure entered, closing the door behind him and engulfing the room in darkness. He whispered something after forming what seemed to be a hand seal in the darkness. From the roof of the dark room, a small light started shining out of nowhere. It became stronger and stronger, until its pale light washed lightly the otherwise dark room. But now, instead of being empty, the chair behind the desk was filled with a long-haired figure, its black hair hiding most of his face. The black-dressed figure brought his fist to his heart. "My lord, you called?" he said, his voice deep and harsh, probably a male. The dark-haired figure seemed to chuckle. "Why yes, I've got something interesting for you to do," he said, and a smirk was evident on his really pale face. He licked his lips with a far too long for human tongue, which also was forked. He seemed to hiss, like a snake. The figure across him slid his hood down. Nightfall. It was nearing, and they had to find a place to sleep. Might as well set up camp or something. They were traveling all day long, no stop from their departure. They would have to sleep in the woods today, since no town was close enough for them to find refuge. The blonde of the team cheered happily, earning a bump on the head from his two allies, the third only having shook her head and giggled. "What was that for?" the blonde asked, clearly irritated. The onyx-haired teen, HNED, while the pink-haired kunoichi next to him was ready for another pummel, being enraged by her friend's foolishness. "Dobi, you really should just shut up," Sasuke said and kept walking, grabbing Sakura from the shoulder so she couldn't kill the Dobi of the company. Naruto was cheering and yelling like that for the past 20 minutes. The lavender-eyed girl next to them just sighed and stood next to the blonde. He was still rubbing his head, pain from the strikes he received moments ago. "Are you okay, Naruto-kun?" she asked softly as always. He nodded and gave her a wide grin. "Don't worry, I'm used to this," he shouted, but quickly grabbed his mouth. Slowly turning around, a raging Sakura along with a glaring Sasuke prepared their fists to make the blonde shut up. Something in Sakura's eye made him understand that the last thing she wanted was to make this quick. He gulped. "See you later, Hinata-chan," he shouted again and sprinted down the road, Sakura and Sasuke following the fleeing, yet also screaming teen. Hinata could hear Sakura shouting, "Shut up, you baka." She giggled. Naruto could be such a child at times. When they were nearly out of sight, she realized that she was left behind. Her eyes went wide before she started sprinting behind them herself. After a few minutes and a few good pummels on the head, Naruto was finally able to control himself and his voice. They still had around half an hour to find shelter before the light of the sun would be completely gone. They stepped out of the road and into the woods, looking for a small clearing where they would set camp. Luckily, there was a cozy area clear of trees where they all would fit nicely. Above them hanged the stars and the now dark sky. They would light a fire in the middle, and luckily, there seemed to be plenty of big rocks around where they would hide under in order to sleep for the night. In their sleeping bags, that is. "All right, Naruto, go gather some wood for the fire. Hinata, you set up the tent. Sasuke-kun and I will bring food," Sakura commanded, and they all nodded, satisfied with the job arrangements. Naruto went quickly deeper in the forest, looking for wood to burn. Hinata took the tent out of Naruto's backpack, which he had left behind as he sprinted in the night. Sakura and Sasuke walked away towards a river the Uchiha spotted nearby. Surprisingly enough, it wasn't far from their camp. They both entered the river while taking off their shoes. Fishing seemed appealing enough. Sakura had heard that there were plenty of big fishes in the rivers of Fire Country during nightfall. "So, what are we going to do with these two?" Sasuke spoke for the first time from the moment they began fishing. He was using his sword to stab the fishes, while Sakura infested small parts of water with her chakra, creating a contained small circle of poison, which could put a fish in deep slumber. It didn't work on humans. She cancelled the small jutsu to look at him confused. He raised an eyebrow while holding his sword high, a fish hanging dead in the grasp of his other hand. "You forgot already?" he asked, a little surprised. She only stared as she searched her mind. It clicked. "Ooh, yeah, I remember, Sasuke-kun. But why should we push things?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Why couldn't they just let Hinata tell him whenever she wanted? Because she never will tell him if things keep going like this. He simply answered as if he read her thoughts. The girl has no backbone in such matters, and the Dobi is just too blind to see. We just have to open his eyes without exposing her. he said and pierced another fish that came by. A big one. She nodded, but still, why was it so important to just get them together? The dobe fuels her with determination whenever needed, and she is really good at calming him down, he said and threw her a smirk. She grinned back, though a little surprised that his answer was as if he read her mind. Yeah, guess the dobe could need a calming hand, someone to support him at dark times. She needed someone to help her stand, help her understand that she was valuable. Who wouldn't be better than Naruto, the blonde that could make a beggar think he's the best in the world? They needed each other, in more ways than one. After a little while, they were all gathered around the newly lightened fire. Hinata offered to cook, and the other three nodded, already knowing the cooking skills of this young Hyuga. They would be announced Mia in Konoha in 2 days from now. So, the sooner they started to hide their tracks, the better. Being one step forward is the key of victory for a shinobi. Naruto couldn't help but admire Hinata's cooking loudly, making the poor girl blush and mumble a, "Thank you." Sasuke smirked. He wondered what would happen when they had a more intimate time with each other. If they had, that is. He too couldn't help but admire, though silently, the girl's cooking skills. Even if you hated fish, her cooking would make you love them. It wasn't long after that they all went to sleep, Naruto giving Hinata a good night first, rather than his two other friends. But they didn't pay much attention to such a small act, thus shoving it away. They unrolled their sleeping bags. It wasn't long after that they all fell in a dreamless sleep. A lonely figure sat atop the highest branches of a nearby tree, having full view of the little encampment. He smirked. Good, very good, he thought to himself, as shadows seemed to consume him. Polished wooden floors, dull white walls, people with eyes that seemed to have no emotion at all. People who put their pride above all others. The Hyuga compound. A white-dressed man, probably a branch member since he had bandages tied on his forehead to hide the seal, knocked on a double wooden door in the left of a hallway. A commanding, yet cold voice from inside gave permission for entrance. Sliding the doors open, the man entered and then closed them behind him. He bowed lowly to the man in front of him, who sat on a desk at the opposite side of the door. The head of the Hyuga clan. Hiashi's cold stare didn't go unnoticed by the guard, who in return gave another cold one, but not in disrespect. The Hyugas were taught this way, the way of coldness. There was only one Hyuga who never used this cold face, and she was out of Konoha on a mission, with 3 more shinobis. Report, Hiashi practically commanded in his always cold tone. The guard bowed again. Hiashi-sama, we have reports that Hinata-sama, along with her group, are heading towards a large town north of Konoha. This at least, is the official report given to the Hokage. The current position of the team cannot be estimated. The guard said and bowed again. Hiashi nodded. Very well. I'll send someone skillful enough to take Hinata back. I can't allow her to roam free, staining our name even more. No matter what the Hokage says, she will be taken back, even by force. He said and nodded again, as if agreeing with himself. You may leave, he added, and the guard bowed again, leaving the room seconds later. Hiashi looked to his left. A female servant stepped forward and bowed. Hiashi seemed to smirk, even for the tiniest split second. Bring me Neji, he commanded, and the still bowed servant left in a hurry. What? Screamed the young green beast of Konoha. The genius of the Hyuga clan just shook his head in annoyance to his friend's attitude. Lee, shut up, he hissed, and the named teen went strangely silent. The weapon mistress of Konoha, Tenten, stood next to her nearly fully green-dressed friend. Neji, Lee has a point. We can't go down there and force Hinata back here, she said and glared at her teammate. He sighed. Flashback. You asked for me, Hiashi-sama? Neji said as he slid the door behind him close and bowed. Looking up, he saw the current head of the clan nodding. Neji had already had his seal removed, so now he was a free main branch member. Indeed, Hiashi replied. His cold stare was eyeing Neji up and down, as if trying to find him guilty for something. Have you been straining yourself in training, Neji? He said. Neji was a little taken aback, not understanding the point of such a question. He replied nonetheless, no Hiashi-sama. I just had some strong sparring opponents lately, he said, and the head of the clan nodded once more. Hiashi was known among the members of his clan for his short answers, unexpected questions, and, something that has come to be a normal trait among the Hyugas, cold attitude. Good. You'll need your strength, he said and started checking something on an open scroll in front of him. I have something of great importance for you to deal with, Neji, he said out of the blue as he kept looking at the scroll. Neji seemed to be ready to raise an eyebrow in curiosity, but he restrained himself from such an act. Hiashi took his silence as a, go on. What I need you to do, Neji, is to bring Hinata back here the soonest possible. This girl cannot be allowed to roam free out there, he said. Neji could explode in anger if his manners and respect didn't allow him. Girl? Hinata was nearly a full-grown woman for God's sake. And roam free? She wasn't an animal. She was one of the best shinobis Konoha had to offer, yet Hiashi didn't want to understand that. He sought complete perfection from anyone in his clan. But what would a simple girl do when her own father seemed to think she was weak? From where would she get the power to stand her ground and try again? There was no one to give her such power when she was a child, until the first day she went to the academy. Her results were becoming better, little by little, yet her father couldn't just be pleased. If he didn't have perfection, he had nothing. Nevertheless, he still had to give Hiashi an answer. He was ready to start talking, but it seemed that Hiashi had taken his silence as another, go on, sign. I'll have some of my best guards too. He was cut off by an ahem from his nephew. What is it? He asked, irritation not visible in his features or voice, yet Neji knew that interrupting him was something that clearly annoyed the head of the clan. Excuse me, Hiashi-sama, but I'd like to pick up my teammates on this missions by myself. He said and bowed. Hiashi eyed him for a moment. Neji knew he couldn't get away from the assignment, so bringing with him the right people for the job would make it easier to complete his mission, without unnecessary casualties. End flashback. So, let me get this straight. You want us to go and fight Hinata, Sasuke, Naruto and Sakura in order to get the poor girl back? You know what will happen if she comes back better than any of us. Tenten practically shouted, but a glare from Neji made her go silent. Silence. None must know about this. I trust you, that's why I want you with me. Neji said calmly. Tenten nodded. Yash, let us go and save our beloved comrade then. Lee shouted, giving them a wink. They both sighed. Thank God they were in a nearly desolated area of Konoha. The Rookie 9 along with Neji's team, were some of the few that knew the truth about what was going on with their 4 friends. They all were somehow happy about them, knowing they were going somewhere better. But still, this didn't mean that they were safe yet, Little did they know, that something made of pure shadow was watching the whole thing. A yawn, a stretch. Our favorite blonde is awake. Yash, another day is up. Breakfast, he shouted excitedly. The fish he ate yesterday were one of a kind. To his surprise, no pummel on the head came because he was loud. Neither did someone shout, shut up baka, or anything. To tell the truth, it was silence that met him. Looking around, he noticed 3 sleeping bags around the small clearing. He got out of his own and slowly walked towards the one nearest to him. Looking closely, he saw the usual, ink blue-haired head that its owner was a cute pale-skinned girl. Why did the cute word kept coming up? Seeing Hinata's peaceful expression, he was glad that at least he didn't wake her up with his shouting. It was so rare to see her like this. She was always blushing and nervous looking, but it was now that he really noticed the true paleness of her skin. It wasn't too much, but it wasn't too little. It was just perfect. He shook the thoughts away as he had to check on his other friends and teammates. He slowly walked towards Sakura's sleeping bag. How did he know it was Sakura's? It was pink. Searching for her head, he was frightened when he found nothing. He even looked inside the bag, as if hoping that Sakura had shrunk and was hiding inside it. He rushed towards Sasuke's. It was empty. Rushing back to Hinata, he was ready to start shouting and shake the poor girl to no end, but as he opened his mouth, the peacefulness of her expression made him go silent once more. He grabbed her shoulders and started to shake her the lightest way he could. Hinata, Hinata-chan, he shouted silently. It was then that her eyelids started twitching. She was awakening. Opening her eyes, she met blue orbs. From where did she know this orbs? Her vision soon became clearer, and she was now able to make out a black and orange jacket, a tan-skinned face with whisker marks on each cheek, and spiky blonde hair. She blushed. Hinata, wake up! He shouted silently again, and seeing the worry in his expression, her blush faltered. Naruto-kun, what is it? She asked worriedly, still a little sleepy. He explained what happened, from the moment he woke up till the moment he started to shook her. But Naruto-kun, what if they have just gone to find food or something? She asked, a little curious as to why he hadn't thought about this. He scratched the back of his head. Well, he started but his voice trailed off. Hinata shook her head and smiled. He could be so silly at times. Naruto-kun, they must be okay. You're just overreacting, she said reassuringly and he grinned. Yep, that must be it. Sorry for waking you up. He trailed off once more. She shook her head again. Don't worry about it. I would wake up sooner or later anyway, she said. He grinned again. If you want, I can make sure you won't wake up again, milady, a cold voice said, a little formally. Both shinobis jumped up in a fighting stance. Now, let us not be hasty. Don't you want to be a little tortured before dying? He asked mockingly and chuckled. They turned to the left to see who was talking. Nothing. You need to look a little better, the voice said again from their right. They turned. Nothing. You know, I should just come out and kill you, the voice said again and now, right in front of them, a figure started materializing from the shadows. They stared in awe as a tall man was practically created in front of them. He wore a long black robe with red lines going from the shoulder and down to the bottom of the cloth. His hood hid most of his face, only the outline of it being visible. They were surprised nonetheless, that even in the weak light of the early sun, his face was still hidden in the shadows. His lips plastered a crazy grin. Oh, I will have fun. Your little friends escaped, but you will not, he said, and by pointing a finger at them, the shadows around him were raised to 10 feet height, and charged towards them. My head, Sasuke whispered to himself before his eyes could even open. He felt as if hammers were pumping his brain. Slowly opening his eyes, he met white golden ones that stared in his own, as if trying to read his soul. What the? A whisper was heard and his world turned black once more. Are we there yet? Asked Tenten anxiously. They had departed with the first light of the morning sun. Neji ground his teeth. He calmed himself down. No. They're at least a day ahead of us. If my calculations are correct, we will meet them in about a day. And stop asking me, he said and turned his head to look forward again. He, Tenten and Lee were at least halfway to the small town where their friends were supposed to be. One more day? The weak light of the morning sun had suddenly vanished. They all looked up, but there were no clouds in the sky. Looking around, they noticed something that made them shiver. Darkness had started engulfing the surrounding area. What the? Neji managed to say. It was as if a dome of darkness had started materializing around them, engulfing everything in its way. Move, Neji managed to shout and they were all shot out of their trance. They started running towards what seemed to be the wall of the dome that was beginning to go higher and higher. When they got close, living shadows popped out of the ground and pushed them back. They were startled nonetheless, that shadows suddenly came to life. They managed to keep themselves standing and eyed their new enemy. They were tall, black creatures made out of pure black shadow. You could swear that they were darker than the black color itself. They had long pointy ears and their hands seemed clawed, as well as their feet. You could say that they were black trolls or something. There were 3 of them and they all chuckled evilly. Neji slipped in the usual Juken stance of the Hyuga clan. Lee entered his lotus stance while Tenten prepared a handful of kunai and shuriken. The monsters kept chuckling. Tenten jumped high in the air and launched numberless shuriken and kunai to her enemies. You could swear that the weapons were coming out of thin air. The monsters became one with the ground to avoid the attack. Tenten's weapons hit nothing but dirt. One of them suddenly appeared in front of Neji, materializing right in front of him. Luckily, he was fast enough to avoid a claw attack that could easily sever his head. He launched his palm, targeting his opponent's stomach. His fist flew right through the enemy. He looked up and stared at the black eyes of the monster. There was now a big hole in the creature's stomach, but the monster didn't seem affected in the least, it just chuckled and raised its claws again. Lee kept kicking and punching his opponent but to no avail. The monster didn't even move as the attacks practically flew through it. Lee himself had to dodge every attack the monster made, its claws seeming to be able to cut through stone as if it was hot butter. He jumped away towards Neji and Tenten. What are we going to do? I can't even touch them, he shouted as the monster charged towards him again. Neji ducked another claw strike to the head. I don't know. These things don't even have a chakra system. He shouted and tried once more to hit his opponent, who just sat there to accept the attack which once more flew right through him. What do you mean? Tenten asked as she barely dodged another strike. Her weapons couldn't even parry these claws, as the hand went right through them. They didn't fly through her long-sleeve blouse though, as it was already shredded from one of the strikes, leaving her only with her shirt and a wrecked cloth. They don't have a system. They're made out of pure chakra. Neji shouted again and they all jumped away from the monsters to catch their breath. These things seemed unbeatable. The monsters chuckled evilly at the weakness of their opponents. They were such an easy prey. Suddenly, the darkness was pierced with light. Meimei Kaihao. Shinpai. Divine release. Judgment, a voice yelled, but one couldn't make out if it was male or female. It just was. Light started emitting from the center of the dark monstrosities. They screamed as the light became stronger and stronger, and in the end, these monsters of shadow were consumed in a white golden light. The three teens just blinked in confusion at the sudden turn of the battle. Looking around, they noticed the dome of darkness retreating back, allowing more of the morning sunlight to wash the land. They could swear they saw something flying into the woods with blinding speed, but they weren't sure what it was, the darkness still having hidden most of the surrounding area. Neji looked behind him, sensing a strange chakra presence, but as his pale eyes met golden white ones, the light of the world faded, leaving him in the darkness of unconsciousness. His teammates were next to fall. What the hell is this? He kept thinking to himself as he tried his best to dodge the shadows. They weren't like the Nara clan's shadows. This ones could eat you for breakfast. Shredded pieces of wood were lying everywhere. The lavender-eyed girl dodged another shadow beam, which enveloped the tree behind her. As the shadow enveloped the whole tree, it faded, leaving the tree seemingly untouched for a second. Then it fell to the ground, in pieces. Stop running away from your fate. The black-dressed man yelled as his shadows kept attacking. Both Naruto and Hinata were hailing shuriken and kunai towards him every now and then. Too bad the weapons were lost in darkness as the shadows enveloped and seemingly vaporized them. Naruto couldn't do anything else. He couldn't get near the guy, for the closest he was, the fastest the shadows were. And he could barely dodge them right now. Hinata, run! He shouted suddenly and the teen was surprised nonetheless. Naruto, run away from battle? We can't defeat him. He might even kill you. He shouted again as a shadow beam ran right above his left arm, shredding the cloth while luckily leaving only a gash on the skin. Naruto winced for a split second before jumping away. Hinata was touched nonetheless, that he wanted to flee in order to keep her safe. Yet again, they really couldn't defeat him, not now. They both balanced their step and prepared to run away. Oh, no you don't. The man shouted again. His hands flew like crazy through small series of hand seals. Kage Shakuhou. Kage Ngai. Shadow release. Shadow dome, he yelled. The teen's feet came to an immediate halt as mere meters from their position, shadows started rising. They kept rising and rising till a great wall was created. It turned and started heading towards the other side. Soon, a dome was created in their vicinity, enveloping the area in darkness, allowing only a small opening at the top of it in order to let air and a little light to enter. Too bad, the opening was more than 100 feet high. What the hell? Naruto shouted, surprised at the sudden change of events. They turned around to look at the tall black figure, who now was a mere foot away from them. They shivered, his face was now completely hidden in the darkness, while the only thing that let them know he was there was his chakra signature and his evil chuckle. The chuckle turned to a maniac laughter as the man launched his head back and laughed his heart out. He composed himself, but a wide evil grin was visible under the shadows. Not hell kid, not even close, he shouted and launched his hands forwards as if wanting to grasp them. Naruto knew what that meant. They now were in a shadow dome, with nearly no light. Shit, this wasn't good. The shadows now were everywhere, which meant that the whole area was under his full, deadly control. What could he do? He could feel the man's chakra becoming one with the shadows, and they in turn rose and started to take the shape of a pointy triangle, ready to pierce right through them. He could feel the shadows enveloping, but could not see them. Things were like shit, as the shadows were ready to charge towards them and finish them off. Meimei Kaihao. Tenrai Tamashibi. Divine release. Divine light, a voice yelled, but it was just a voice, as if it came from nothing. One could swear that this voice was pure light. The shadows were suddenly destroyed, as soft golden light washed the darkness away. Both teens were practically blinded by the power. They felt hands grasping them, but before they could even react, their world was turned in a realm of darkness. Sakura slowly opened her eyes, and gasped. The last thing she remembered was her lying in her sleeping bag. Now, she was sighted on a rock, her back being against something hard, yet soft altogether. Turning her head around, she saw the edge of an onyx-haired head. Her world brightened realizing who it was. To her relief, she also realized that she wasn't tied up. Turning her whole body around, she hugged Sasuke's unconscious form and rested his head on her lap. His peaceful expression was enough to bring a smile on her lips. "I see you're quite affectionate for this youth, aren't you?" she heard a voice saying, but there was no mock in its words, no anger, no fear. It had pure sincerity. Even so, thanks to her ninja and natural reflexes, her free hand flew to her thigh to catch a kunai. Too bad, the weapon's holster wasn't there. Now, let us not resort to violence. I'm sure we can short things out," the voice said once more, curiosity and seriousness mixed together. She looked around, but saw no one. "What the hell is going on?" she asked, clearly irritated. She heard the voice making a sound. "Now, hell isn't the right word to use here. Look around you," the voice said, and she obeyed, even hesitantly. It was then that she really took notice of her surroundings. She was on a large round rock, Sasuke in her lap. Around them were only trees, above them was only the clear blue sky. They were in a clearing, a rather strange clearing if you think that there was only a large rock in the middle of it. It was then that she also realized the presence of her two other friends. Naruto and Hinata were lying a few feet away from them, they too on the rock. She gasped and she was ready to rush to their side, if only to check if they were alive. The voice halted her movements once more. "Don't you worry about them. They are not harmed. I have other matters to talk to you about, but I need all of you awake. If you please now, let him out of your lap," it said gently, and she obeyed. Lifting Sasuke's head from her lap, she noticed that his eyelids immediately started to rise. When he was fully awake, he jumped upwards, standing on his feet and looking around like crazy, as if expecting a monster to jump out of nowhere. It was then that he noticed his pink-haired teammate sitting next to him, looking at him as if he had grown a second head. He sighed and calmed down. "Sakura, where are we?" he asked. The attention of them both was caught by a loud "ah" of annoyance at their left. Naruto was awake. The blonde did the same thing as Sasuke, though he looked more panicked, waving his hands around and shouting curses and threats to a black-dressed man, as they managed to make out from his shouts. Both of them pumped him on the head with Sakura shouting, "Hey, shut up you baka." It was then that they noticed Hinata was also awake, having sat down next to them with her eyes looking at them worriedly, as if expecting them to fall down any minute now. "Now, if you are done arguing and such," they all jumped, surprised at the sudden addition of voices. It was male. Turning to their left, they saw a white-dressed man walking slowly towards them. He wore a long white robe, his hands hidden in his long sleeves as a white hood also hid his face. His chin, mouth and the edge of his nose were visible under the hood. He had a short, white blonde beard. They also noticed that the robe was decorated with golden lines gracing the white cloth of the robe. The man smiled. "Hey, are you a monk?" Naruto managed to say. He, like the other three, were stunned at the sudden appearance of the man. "Well, you can also add the strange, yet fancy outfit." The man chuckled to himself. No, my friend. A monk I am not, at least not by the meaning you give to the word, that is," he said gently, his voice not too harsh, not too soft. The balance was clearly audible. "Anyo, what's going on here?" Hinata asked, and they were all again a little surprised that she talked. The man smiled again. "This is something I'd also love to know," he said sighing, yet the smile that graced his lips didn't falter. They all looked at him curiously, expecting an explanation. "The sooner the better." Well, from where should I begin?" he said and sat down cross-legged on the rock. He motioned them to follow his example and they all mimicked his movement. "There are powers beyond that of human understanding in this world. Am I correct?" he asked rhetorically, and they all nodded. He smiled again. "Well, these powers, even if they are not to be understood, they exist, don't they?" he asked again, his expression seeming serious under the hood. They all looked at each other, as if expecting to find the answer in each other's eyes. Naruto shrugged. "I guess, yeah," he said, bringing the demon inside him in his mind. Kyuubi existed, even if he didn't really understand his powers. Good, the man said and smiled again. There is an unbalance lurking in the world right now, and you were unfortunately caught in the middle of a small conflict. I and my men managed to save you, but I must warn you, he said, and his expression once more was serious. They could feel the seriousness emitting in the air around the man. Do not interfere, unless your life is at stake. You will not have the luck of us saving you every time, my children. Now, if you please, I will take my leave, he said and stood up. Naruto's eyes went wide. Wait, you haven't even told us your name, he shouted. The man smiled. All you have to know is that you must not interfere with the balance of the forces. Enough has happened, you should return to your original journey, he said and motioned them to stand up. They did. Head north. The road is only a kilometer or so away from here, he said, pointing at the direction of the road. He smiled at them, and they saw that light started enveloping him. His smile never faltered. Good luck, my children, he said as the light had nearly enveloped all of him. We might meet again. They heard his voice whispering as the light suddenly vanished, and with it the man was also gone. Weird, Naruto finally exclaimed as he rubbed the back of his head. What did the man mean by that? Sasuke shrugged. Probably problems between some villages, and we were caught in the middle. We should just keep going with the original plan, he said and looked at the others, who all nodded except Naruto, he still being a little confused. A natural instinct then took over the blonde's senses. And he knew exactly what time it was. Launch time, he yelled happily and rushed for his backpack. He had noticed their items lying at the other end of the rock before. Opening his own with haste, his eyes started to beam as his hands touched what he thought as the gift of the heaven to the world. Ramen. He took the packs of instant ramen out of the backpack. He could rant about ramen all day long, but thankfully, Sasuke and Sakura were there to silence him before he could even begin. It was funny that the Dobi could eat ramen at any time of the day, since now it seemed that the sunset was nearing slowly. After an hour and a physically satisfied Naruto, they began their journey to the unknown once more. Neji's eyelids started to open slowly, his vision still blur and dizzy. He managed to make out a white wall? Wait, he knew this white wall, it was his bedroom's white wall. Wait, all of the Hyuga's compound's walls were white. How the hell did he recognize his own? He shook these thoughts away as they made little sense. He looked around to recognize the rest of his bedroom. What the hell was going on? Ah, at last awake, my child, he heard a male voice saying gently, yet his hand immediately flied for his weapon pouch, which wasn't there. Easy now, violence won't solve anything, he heard the same voice saying. He looked at the edge of his bed, only to see a tall man dressed in a long white robe sitting there. The man was looking at him, yet his eyes were hidden under his hood. A smile was evident under his bearded face. Who are you? Neji asked, a little too confused as to how this man managed to enter the compound without being noticed by anyone. The man's smile didn't falter. I am here to tell you everything will be all right, he said, sincerity covering his words. What did he mean? It was then that Neji remembered the previous events. He was sent out on a mission, and encountered these strange monsters on his way. What you fought with was something beyond what any ninja could handle, my friend. Please, forget about it. Now, about your mission, he said, and smiled again. I have taken care of your respected leader. Please don't take me wrong, I have just erased from his memory the fact that he wanted to seal his daughter. The girl is now safe, he said, and at this, Neji calmed down. But another question lurked in his mind. You still haven't told me who are you, and why you saved us? He expected the man to have helped his allies too. His smile had yet to fall from his lips. Your friends are safe, if that is what you want to know. As to who I am and why my men saved you, let's just say that we have some affairs with the monsters that came against you. All you have to know about me is that I exist, he said, and light covered him. In a flash, he was gone. But a split second before the light faded, Neji heard words being whispered in his mind. Live your life, young Hyuga. Your cousin is in good hands, the voice whispered before everything went silent. Looking outside, he noticed the sky had began to go orange. The sunset was nearing. Oiteme, a town. A blonde teen shouted excitedly at the sight of civilization. Sasuke, HNED, while the two girls seemed to beam with light. At least Sakura did. A town, the pink-haired girl shouted in excitement. The other three eyed her questioningly. What? Can't I be loud for once? She asked and glared at them all, who took a step back. Sakura's anger could easily match Tsunade's. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go. Naruto shouted again and they all started walking towards the little town. Wow, Sakura beamed as her eyes turned into stars. She was eyeing a pink-red dress, white stripes running around the cloth, making it look like strawberry with vanilla lining. Hinata, on the other hand, seemed to prefer a plain lavender dress. Both boys stood behind them, lost in their own thoughts. It fits with her eyes, Naruto thought as he glanced between the dress Hinata was looking at and the said person. He shook his head as thoughts, some a little inappropriate, entered his mind. He turned around looking at nothing in particular as people kept walking between them to their respective jobs. I'm not a pervert, I'm not a pervert, I'm not a pervert, he kept thinking to himself. He didn't want to be like his perverted senseis. At the thought of his old sensei, his mood darkened. Yes, Jiraiya was a perverted old fool, but his death wasn't something he could ever wish for. Flashback. Naruto, get the hell out of here. Jiraiya yelled as the ceiling of the roof started to collapse. Pain, along with his 6 bodies, turned their gaze to the blonde. Naruto stood right next to his sensei, who was bleeding badly, barely able to keep breathing. No, I can't leave you here, the blonde yelled. Jiraiya frowned. Go now, you fool. There are people out there who need you, he said with all the power he could master. Team 7 waited for him outside. Kakashi, Sasuke, and Sakura were all battling with the other members of the Akatsuki. Only Kisame and Itachi were absent from the battleground. I don't think so, all of Pain's bodies said in unison as they glared at the blonde teen. Naruto frowned, but a large chunk of rock that fell a few feet to his left reminded him of the situation. Then I'll take you bastard with me. Naruto shouted angrily. Jiraiya coughed blood. No. Naruto, get out of here, please, he said weakly, his powers being drained. Naruto looked worriedly at his sensei. He had said please. Before he could contemplate further on what to do, one of the bodies charged against him. The others circled around him, just standing there. Naruto knew what he was doing. He was getting a full field of vision. The Rinnegan had the ability to link visual contact among Pain's bodies, thus giving him a field of vision that outmatched the Byakugan, since one, in this case Pain, had 6 points of view. The body attacked at full speed, and Naruto, who was already tired from the battle, could barely dodge the attacks. A kick found him in the gut. He was sent flying above the bodies and near the exit. The bodies ignored him as they turned towards Jiraiya once again. The roof of the cave slowly kept falling. The only reason that it hadn't collapsed was because of one of Pain's earth jutsus that kept the rocks together. But even Pain isn't God, right? Pain himself took out a kunai from inside his robe. He eyed the wounded Jiraiya. Now, I shall finish this, he said and slowly walked towards the defenseless hermit. Naruto could only stare as his own powers were fading. That kick was quite hard. Naruto, get out of here. Jiraiya managed to say one last time before he collapsed. He coughed blood again and raised himself with all the strength remaining in his hands. He raised his head to look at Pain's smirking face. It has come to an end, Jiraiya-sama, he said, faking formality. Jiraiya made a fake smile. Indeed it has, he said and grabbed Pain's leg. Whispering something, Pain felt all the control he had over the earth jutsu fading. What the, he said and looked up. The ceiling was now falling. Damn you, he shouted and kicked the hermit away. He turned towards the exit. Naruto stood there, right at the exit of the cave. He was smirking. A Rasengan had formed in the blonde's hand. He glared as Pain's expression turned from surprise to horror. See you in the afterlife, he shouted and rammed the Rasengan at the top of the opening, smashing the stones and letting the entrance crumble. No, he heard Pain's voice fading as the sound of massive rocks smashing was heard. A flicker of light blinded his vision for a second, but he thought it was just the sun. Turning around, hey, Dobi, had fun? Sasuke managed to say between his breaths. He clearly looked exhausted from the battle. Kakashi stood next to him, blood covering parts of his body. The silver-haired ninja noticed his student's worried look. Not mine, he simply said, simply raising his hand to wave off the worry. Naruto sighed. Sakura herself had managed to survive through the slaughter. The whole force they had brought with them to take out the Akatsuki hideout had turned in a battle for survival, as the Akatsuki members killed their fellow ninjas just for fun. Finally, this menace had come to an end. The pink-haired girl smiled weakly at her team. She was wounded, some deep cuts gracing her legs and hands. Kakashi eyed them all. Any sign of Itachi? Or Kisame? He asked. They all shook their heads. He sighed. It looks like they haven't entered the battle at all, Sakura said, and Sasuke ground his teeth. He thought this was his chance to finally battle his brother. What about Jiraiya-sama? Kakashi asked again, and all three looked at Naruto. The teen lowered his head, reminded of what had happened. End flashback. Naruto. Help! He heard Sasuke shouting. Quickly turning around, the sight before him made him want to laugh his head off. Sakura was dragging Sasuke in the cloth store, while he struggled to free himself. Naruto smirked. He knew his brother could easily escape. He took notice of Sasuke's slight smirk a second before they entered the store. He felt someone tugging his sleeve. Turning to his left, he saw Hinata's pouting face pleading him to come with her. He sighed and shook his head. She made the most irresistible puppy dog eyes he had ever seen. He sighed again and nodded, pretending to be annoyed. Hinata giggled and hastily walked towards the store, still holding on Naruto's sleeve. When she was sure that her front was out of his sight, she finally allowed a slight blush to grace her pale face. Damn it, Sasuke mumbled to himself as he sat on a small couch, still waiting for Sakura to change. It had been around an hour doing the exact same things. Why did he let her drag him into this again? She would gather a bunch of clothes, enter the changing cabin, exit and ask him his opinion. He would and she would nod, as if he had openly said he liked it. She would go back in and try something else on. He turned his gaze to the left, where Naruto sat on a chair waiting for Hinata to come out of her own changing cabin. He sighed. The doby must have been taking it even harder than him, since he wasn't allowed to bounce around or yell like crazy. He smirked. Wow, that looks great, Hinata-chan. Naruto exclaimed happily as Hinata got out of the changing room. She wore a blue round hat, a white long-sleeved shirt and lavender pants that reached down her knees. The only thing that showed she was a ninja were the sandals she still wore. She smiled. Thank you, Naruto-kun, she said, but she couldn't help but blush slightly. He would always praise every cloth she wore. She started to think he just did it because he had to, not because he really found her pretty. She was a little disappointed at this thought but didn't let this show on her features. This, perfect, features by Naruto's opinion? Wait, when did he start thinking like this again? He shook these thoughts away as she entered the cabin once more. He noticed her picking up something lavender before she did so. What outfit was up next? Alright, how's that looking? Sakura asked excitedly and couldn't feel more satisfied in her whole life. Sasuke was ready to drool in front of her. She was wearing the pink, red and white lined dress they had seen before. It was sleeveless, the crook of the neck being clearly visible while her sides were also exposed from the cloth. The dress reached down her feet, hiding her shoes or whatever she wore. Sasuke couldn't help but stare. This looks good, he finally said as he composed himself. Sakura giggled. It was so obvious that he found it more than gorgeous. Naruto patted his feet in anxiety. What was up next? To tell the truth, it didn't really matter. Anything she would wear looked good on her. He turned around, hearing a ruffle from the direction of the cabin. At what he saw, he could swear he was dreaming. Hinata walked out of the cabin, her feet hidden under the long dress. It was this lavender dress they had seen before. He could swear he hadn't seen anything more beautiful. Even a pork ramen deluxe couldn't match this sight. The dress fitted her perfectly, complementing the right curves. It was sleeveless and the crook of the neck wasn't covered, while two strands of cloth on the shoulders kept the lavender cloth from falling. Her back was also exposed, leaving the pale skin visible. She had also rounded up her long hair in a big bun, letting the whole beauty of the dress be visible. He was sure that the cloth was soft like silk. He wanted to check if this pale skin was silky too. Hinata blushed at his gaze, the red taint visible on her pale face. Naruto was staring at her as if there was nothing else existing in the world. He shook his thoughts away as Hinata waved a hand in front of his face. Naruto-kun, are you alright? She asked a little worriedly. He was zoned out for more than a minute now. He shook his head. I'm fine, Hinata-chan. This dress looks fantastic, he exclaimed happily. She smiled, yet blushed altogether. She could see the sincerity in his voice, in his face, in his eyes. It was all over him. After another hour of endless clothes searching, the girls finally managed to find an outfit that they really liked. To the guys' secret disappointment, the dresses they had seen before weren't in their choices. Sasuke could swear though that he saw Sakura slipping something in the bags. "So, what about that town?" asked a blue-skinned man. His cheeks were lined with 3 large lines each, giving you the impression that he was a shark. He had canines while his eyes were small and round. His hair were Kakashi style, but blue in color. On his shoulder he held one of the legendary swords of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. He wore a long high-collar black robe with crimson-red clouds scattered around. Who else could it be than Hokage Kisame? The man standing next to him eyed him with his red gaze. His long onyx hair were caught in a ponytail, while 2 small lines went down between his eyes and nose. He too wore the same robe as his ally. He had the Sharingan bloodline limit that now graced only 2 people in the world with its power. One of the holders was Uchiha Sasuke, ninja of Konoha. The other, Uchiha Itachi, slaughterer of his own clan and high-ranked missing nin. And this man stood right now beside Kisame, his red Sharingan gaze having befallen on his comrade. "What?" Kisame asked, a little afraid. Itachi sighed. Nothing," he said while he shook his head. His eyes turned their normal onyx color again. "Let's move on, there's a town up ahead," he said and started walking. Kisame stared at him a little surprised. "What?" "That's what I said," he said and hastily fell in step with his teammate. A man dressed in a black robe was slowly walking down the road. His gaze was fixed right in front of him, down towards the horizon. His eyes were caught by the sight of a sign at the left of the road. He didn't stop to read it, but he could make out big letters that could only evidence one thing. If one could see in his robes, he could take notice of the man's hands stroking a strange sword with anxiety at what was to come next. He was nearing a town. At the western part of the little town, 2 men, both dressed in long white robes with hoods hiding their faces, sat cross-legged atop a hilltop, gazing over the small community. The one at the left had a short gray blonde beard while the one next to him seemed to have a much younger face. The small part of his visible features evidenced that his face was more than beautiful. They both seemed to stare at the small town even if their eyes were hidden under the hoods. "What do you think, senpai? Should we allow things to roll on their own?" the young one asked, his voice evidencing a young male man. The older one stayed still for a moment. He said, evidencing his deep thought. "Be patient, young one, we shall see. I just hope that we don't come to this," he said, a little bit of fear evident in his otherwise sure and serious, yet gentle, voice. "Senpai, you knew that the day would come. People have the right to know." The young man was cut off as the older one raised his hand. "My child, you must understand that some things aren't for the ears, nor the eyes, of the many," he said wisely while he lowered his hand. He sighed. "We still don't know what the Lord really plans," he added. The young man smiled. "Did we ever?" he said, mock not evident in his own gentle voice. The older man smiled himself. "You are right, but humans have the right of free will. We will not interfere unless needed," he said and nodded. The young one nodded himself. "I understand. Let us hope that things will go well. Otherwise he might not survive," he said a little worriedly as he trailed off. The old man nodded again. "True. This youngster is such a rare occasion," he said a little worriedly himself. "But you know we can't define his will. Things will go as he wishes," the old man added. The young one nodded. "Let us hope he knows how to wish." They exited the clothing store and it was then that they realized that night was really setting. Hinata suggested finding a hotel to stay the night and so they did. After a few minutes of searching, they found an economically satisfying hotel. They took 2 rooms, one for Hinata and Sakura and one for Naruto and Sasuke, each one with 2 beds. Each room was at either side of the hallway, boys to the left, girls to the right. After they settled their things in their rooms, they met up again in the entrance of the hotel. They were all grinning. Naruto's stomach made a loud rumble, evidencing his natural situation. Sasuke's sweat dropped. "Dobi, you ate 5 bowls of instant ramen before we left the forest," he said, a little amazed that Naruto could burn food that fast. The said blonde brought his hand behind his head in embarrassment. "Yeah, but I guess it's because I usually eat 9 and," he cut himself off as he noticed a vein twitching wildly on Sakura's forehead. Yep, she was sure he would start ranting about ramen again. Sasuke and Hinata's sweat dropped as Hinata tried to get Naruto's attention away from ramen and Sasuke tried to calm Sakura down. Too bad, they were failing miserably. Hinata tugged his sleeve and made this irresistible puppy dog eyes once more. Naruto couldn't help but crumble. Sasuke resorted to the final thing he could do to hold Sakura back. He kissed her on the cheek. She froze right at that spot. It was as if time had suddenly stopped. Yep, her anger was forgotten for sure. Very well, we should find somewhere to eat, Sasuke suggested and the others nodded. Sakura having merely done it since she was still a little stunned at Sasuke's act. Naruto on the other hand caught himself stealing glances at Hinata, as if expecting to see that wonderful pale lavender eyes do that pout again. What was wrong with him? He shook these thoughts away as he remembered what Sasuke said. His mind went on overload with one word. Food. Food? Can we have? He was cut off once more as he noticed Sakura's glare, her anger ready to flare at any moment. He sighed. As they left the hotel and turned around a corner, a pair of men dressed in a black robe with crimson clouds walked down the street towards the hotel. Their steps were halted. The onyx-haired one eyed the sign that hung above their heads. The blue-skinned man next to him was looking around, as if in high alert. Itachi, something doesn't feel right, he said worriedly. The named man eyed his ally. I know, he said and walked in the hotel, Kisame following behind. They stood before the counter, a young woman smiling softly at them both. Both Itachi and Kisame were smiling back, the first having put up a genjutsu from their first moment in town, making them both look like normal civilians. May I help you? The woman asked gently. Itachi nodded. We would like to have a room please, he said gently himself. Kisame stayed silent and just kept the smile on his face. The woman nodded and got out of a drawer the customer catalog. She gave Itachi a pen. As the missing nin wrote down their names, fake ones of course, he took notice of a very, very familiar name at the latest entities of the catalog. He smirked inwardly. 2 birds with 1 stone. They had finally found a nice restaurant at the edge of town, not far from their hotel. They all sat down at a table, which found itself near the windows. Looking outside, one could see the dark forests that enveloped the land beyond the small town. There was also a hill among them, the moon hanging right at the top of it, like a ball of light based on the structure of nature. The 2 males sat next to each other, facing the females of the small company. Sasuke smirked, Naruto and Sakura grinned while Hinata smiled. The lavender-eyed girl felt a little weird being away from her former team. She was used to them, used to their presence, used to their attitudes. But this group was a new one. Thankfully, it wasn't unpleasant at all. Sakura was more than a good company and Sasuke wasn't the iceberg people thought him as. And of course, it was also Naruto. Naruto looked between Sakura and Hinata. It was quite amusing. Sakura had short, bright pink hair while Hinata had long ink blue. Sakura was more tan-skinned while Hinata pale-skinned. Sakura was always angry against him while Hinata was always gentle and caring. Wait a minute, now that he thought about it, there was no other person that acted like that towards him. She was the only one that cared, from the beginning. His memory flashed at the time she gave him that medicine 3 years ago at the preliminaries of the Chunin exam. It flashed again when she encouraged him before his battle with Neji. No one had acted like that for him before. Where everyone wanted to make him pity himself, she made him believe in it once more. She wasn't simply a nice person, a person he liked. She was. Dobi, what do you want? Sasuke asked as he raised an eyebrow towards his brother. Naruto shook his head. Eyeing the catalog quickly one more time, he noticed that there was no ramen. He finally ordered sushi. Sasuke faked boredom as he looked between his friends, his gaze locking on Sakura for a mere more second. She had stopped a long time acting like a fangirl. She was more like a friend now, and she treated him like a normal person, rather than the almighty Uchiha. He liked it. She, along with Hinata, was one of the few girls right now that didn't fangirl him in Konoha. He liked it even more. She had bright pink hair and green emerald eyes. Imagine what children might come. He shook the thoughts away. Where was his mind getting him? He had other matters to attend to right now. He would get to warm Sakura up later. So, what are we doing? He asked out of the blue. All 3 eyed him as if he was crazy. We're in a restaurant and are about to eat? Naruto asked rhetorically. The girls nodded slowly. Sasuke glared at the blonde. Dobi, I mean, what happens when we finish dodging the ninjas and such? Where will we go? He said, and now the girls nodded while Naruto brought his hand to his chin as if in deep thought. Sakura raised her hand. I think we should head north, out of fire country. Lighting is a rather good country, nay? We might find new techniques and such, she said with a smile. Sasuke, HNED. We can't. Lighting is in war with the sand. We would get in the middle of conflict. He was cut off as he noticed Naruto's eyes had gone wide. He looked at them all wide-eyed and then made a grin that one could think was impossible for a face to plaster. Gaara! He shouted excitedly and earned a pump on the head from Sasuke. Sakura was held back by Hinata. Hinata looked at Naruto a little worriedly. You know the cage? She asked. Naruto nodded vigorously. Gaara is a friend and a former Jinchuriki. We can stay in Suna for a while, he said and nodded, agreeing with himself. The others sighed. Naruto, Suna and Iwa are in war. If we interfere, we might get caught in the middle of the conflict. Sakura said wisely, filling the hole that Naruto forgot. The blonde hung his head in disappointment. An idea flashed in his mind then, an idea that he had buried in his mind, an idea of a place that wasn't too far from here, but not too close. It would be a close call, but it was all they had. He grinned to himself again. What about the West? I think there are some clans there that have cool techniques we could get with my Sharingan, Sasuke suggested. Stealing techniques isn't that wise. And, we will most likely have to fight them in order to let you copy them. We might just end up getting killed in the end, she said, countering his idea. What about Orochimaru, Sasuke-san? Isn't he a threat? Hinata asked worriedly. She hadn't forgot that Naruto barely managed to bring Sasuke back from the battle at the Valley of the End. After Naruto's Rasengan and Sasuke's Chidori clashed, Sasuke was thrown unconscious and Naruto, who managed to keep himself awake, brought the Uchiha back. Afterwards, the raven-haired boy was freed of the cursed seal and Tsunade assured them that such an attempt was most unlikely to happen again. The seal corrupted his mind, making only vengeance and hatred guide his vision. He was able to see clearly now, and he was one of the best ninjas Konoha had to offer. For the Uchiha clan wasn't part of it anymore. Sasuke, HNED, with a smirk and stroke his blade, which he had placed standing next to him. It was a silent, let him come. She smiled, but worry wasn't taken off completely. It just couldn't. Oi, guys. I know where we can go, Naruto said out of the blue, and all attention from his three friends was once more drawn on him. It was rare of him to speak seriously, and now, he did. Where? They all asked at the same time. Naruto's grin was wide as ever. Listen up, he said, and now his look turned serious. He looked around worriedly, as if expecting to see someone spying on them. When he was sure that there were no prying ears or eyes around, he turned to his friends with a grin. He started explaining. During his 3 years of travel with Jiraiya, he and the hermit had passed by a village to the north. It was quite far away from here and it would be a little dangerous journey. But Naruto-kun, what kind of village? The lavender-eyed Kunoichi asked worriedly. The other two nodded. Naruto grinned at her and then looked at his other teammates. Well, I should take the story from the beginning, eh? He asked with a grin. The others nodded and smiled themselves. Flashback. Naruto and Jiraiya were walking down the road in the middle of a small forest. Trees were to their left and right while the sky above their heads was clear and sunny. A perfect day? So, Ero Sennin, where are we going now? Asked an overexcited blonde. Jiraiya frowned at the hearing of his nickname. We are going to meet a friend of mine. And stop calling me Ero Sennin. He yelled the last sentence in the blonde's ear, who was taken aback a little. And you stop yelling at me, he shouted back. Jiraiya sighed at his student's foolishness and let the matter drop. He knew they would end up in a dead end anyway. It had been around half an hour of walking when they finally exited the forest. Naruto's eyes went so wide, that if you tacked him on the back of his head, they would pop out for sure. The sight before him was amazing. Till the end of where the eye can see, was an endless valley. Down the horizon, he made out the form of what must have been a mountain. Though it looked like a large rock from his point of view right now. The valley seemed endless as at his left and right was only the flowered or grassy campus. He could make out the cliffs at each side of the valley. But if you looked down the road, the path of dirt seemed to be lost in the horizon, leading to that rock that must be a mountain in close. Jiraiya grinned widely, seeing his pupil's look of amazement. He started walking down the path. "Come on, kid, his house is a few minutes away," he shouted as Naruto was still standing there, staring at the endless fields of green. Naruto was shot out of his trance and looked at his sensei, who was now quite a few meters away. "Hey, wait up," he shouted and dashed behind him. After a few more minutes of walking, Jiraiya halted his movement, making Naruto bump into him. "Hey, why did you stop?" the blonde asked, clearly irritated. Jiraiya turned to look at him with a grin. "Because we're here, kid," he exclaimed and took a step towards the field. Naruto looked at him confused. There was nothing but green and flowers around them. Jiraiya stood one step away from the edge of the field. He looked at his pupil and motioned him to stand next to him. He ran through a series of hand seals, stopping with the dragon sign. He reached his hands out with his palms open in front of him. "Kachiyose no Jutsu," he said, and Naruto was surprised nonetheless. The series he had made weren't for that technique. Out of thin air, runes and symbols started materializing in a circle in front of Jiraiya's hands. A circle was created and then several lines started expanding to different directions. The runes and symbols started changing, and something that looked like wood started materializing. A huge house had started materializing right in front of them. It became bigger and bigger, till it finally revealed a mansion. It was purely made out of wood. The front was a deep brown color while the rooftop seemed to be painted a bright red color. The door was only a foot away from them. Jiraiya smirked. The house was just like how he remembered it. "Come on, kid. The old fool will be waiting for us," he said and opened the door. Naruto was shot out of his trance as he two-stepped in the house and closed the door behind him. End flashback. "So, you've told us about an enormous valley with endless fields of green and flowers. And a house that materialized out of nothing. Mind telling us about the village now, Dobi?" Sasuke asked a little curiously. Hinata nodded and smiled while Sakura kept staring at Naruto. He sighed. "I was getting to that teme," he said, a little irritated. Flashback. It was noon and darkness would very soon engulf the land in the dark sheet of the night. At the big mansion among the fields, 3 figures sat in a small room, lighted only by a few candles and the light of the full moon from the open windows. One was the frog hermit, Jiraiya of the Sannin. The second was his pupil, Uzumaki Naruto. The third was, "Well, how are you doing, Jowa?" Jiraiya asked happily while raising his hand in greeting. The old man in front of them was as tall as Jiraiya, while Naruto was a little shorter. "Better than usual," Jowa answered, his voice a little harsh and old. Naruto had realized that this man must have been really old since he had no hair, but a nice bald head. He also had a long pointy gray beard gracing his chin. He wore a long, dull yellow robe with what seemed to be white clouds flying around. At the center lied a bright sun, numerous lines expanding from the ball. Jowa's old face formed what seemed to be a smile. Naruto was looking a little strangely at this new acquaintance. This man looked weird. If I am weird, then how weird is a ninja with bright orange clothes? Jowa said as if he read his mind. He didn't have to, for Naruto's look on the man said everything the teen didn't put in words. Naruto's eyes went wide as he stared at the old man. "Wait, you read my mind?" he asked, clearly surprised. Jowa smiled. "No, but what you said right now confirmed my words," he said, and his smile was wide as ever. Naruto looked down disappointed with himself. Jowa chuckled. "You've got much to learn, young one," he said and sat down cross-legged, a cup of steaming tea lying next to him. Jiraiya and Naruto followed his example and sat down themselves. "So, Jiraiya, how could an old fool like me be of use?" Jowa asked gently. Jiraiya chuckled. "Always praising yourself, he asked rhetorically, and the man in front of him chuckled. Naruto was boringly looking at them. "And, I see you also got a pupil. Does he make you read his books, kid?" Jowa asked worriedly. Naruto was immediately shot out of his trance. "What? No, I would never read Ero Sennin's books," he said while waving his hands in defense and pointing at his sensei. Jiraiya sighed while Jowa kept chuckling. "A new nickname, Jiraiya? I must say, it is better than the baka Tsunade gave you," he said and chuckled. Jiraiya glared at him and then turned his glare towards his student, who was still defending himself without having noticed that Jowa wasn't interested in that subject anymore. He gave Naruto a pummel on the head. "No, this brat over here has that title and I swear to God, he is the word in flesh and bones," he said and chuckled himself. Naruto pouted. "Hey, what was that about?" Both men sighed and looked between each other. "How long have you been training him, Jiraiya?" Jowa asked and both student and teacher looked at him. 2 years. Jiraiya answered seriously. Jowa nodded. "I see, and how long will the training last?" he asked again and Jiraiya took a glance of Naruto, who was still looking at the old man. "1 more year," he said and Jowa nodded again. "Good. Now, I'd like to ask the boy a few questions. I don't want you to interrupt for any reason, Jiraiya," he said seriously and it was the hermit's turn to nod. Naruto looked worriedly at his teacher and then back at the old man. He noticed that the man was looking at him as if trying to read what he wanted in Naruto's face. The boy gulped. Jowa smiled. "Well, Naruto's the name, am I wrong?" he asked rhetorically and Naruto's eyes went wide for a second. "How did he know his name?" "I know many things. One of them is your name," Jowa said, his smile never faltering. Naruto nodded. It was as if this man could read his mind. "Tell me, Naruto, why do you want to be a ninja?" Jowa asked as he took the cup of tea that lied next to him in his hand. Naruto grinned widely. "That's easy. I want to prove to everyone how strong I am and that I'm not a nobody," he said happily, proud of himself. Jowa kept smiling and took a sip from his tea. "I see. And, why do you want to train and become stronger?" he asked again and Naruto looked at him as if he was crazy. "What are you talking about? How will I become Hokage if I'm not strong?" he asked and grinned widely. Jowa nodded. "So, you want to be the Hokage of Konoha? he asked seriously, his expression a copy of his voice. Naruto nodded vigorously. Why?" Jowa asked again as he took another sip from his tea. Naruto was still grinning widely. "Because when I'll be Hokage, I'll be the strongest ninja in the village. Then everyone will see how strong I really am and they'll stop hating me," he said and his expression grew a little sad. Jowa looked at him strangely for a moment, as if his eyes pierced into his soul. He smiled. "Doesn't anyone in there love you?" he asked as he took another sip. His smile was wide as ever. Naruto shook his head. "No one loves me. Well, Tsunade Oba-chan does. Maybe Ero Sennin too. Even though he's a pervert and such," he threw a smirk at his sensei who ground his teeth. Naruto never lost a chance to point out Jiraiya's perverted side. "No one? What I see is different," Jowa said seriously but his smile was still there. Naruto looked at him as if he was crazy. "What are you talking about?" he asked curiously. Jowa chuckled. "There is someone in there that loves you, kid. You're just too blind to see it. Focus on something else other than training, and your vision will clear," Jowa said seriously and smiled warmly. Naruto looked confused for a moment. Who would love him in the village, other than Ba-chan and Ero Sennin? End flashback. "Till today, I haven't yet found that person. I looked and looked again, but never found it. I thought it would be Sakura-chan, but your behavior gives different clues," Naruto said as he grinned widely at Sakura. Hinata was blushing furiously next to her, but Naruto thought it was just the heat. It was a hot night anyway. Sakura sighed herself. If he was so good at reading her behavior around him, then how the hell hadn't he noticed Hinata's? Naruto was so unpredictable that you couldn't really tell if he truly was an idiot or not, though that's what he showed most of the time. "Dobi, you still haven't told us about the village," Sasuke said and the two girls nodded in agreement. Naruto sighed. "Alright. After that, someone loves you thing, they got me out of the room for about 5–10 minutes. When I entered again." Flashback. Naruto closed the door behind him and sat cross-legged next to his sensei once more. Jiraiya was grinning while Jowa was smiling. "I still don't get why I had to go out," Naruto complained and Jiraiya sighed while he shook his head. Jowa's smile never faltered. "Personal matters, we wanted to catch up with the past. Nothing that should concern you, young one," Jowa said seriously but his smile was still there. Naruto sighed. "So, what goes on around here, old man? I mean, you live all alone in the middle of nowhere?" Naruto asked curiously. "There was a village, but it was across the forest they came from, quite a few miles away." Jowa kept smiling. "I'm not really alone. There's a village to the north of here, but strange things happen lately. They seem to have a few problems," Jowa said and his expression turned into one of thought. "North, that mountain that he had seen was north of here." Could the village be there? Is it a hidden village? Naruto asked again and Jowa eyed him for a second. He then nodded. Naruto searched his memory, but couldn't remember any hidden village being in this vicinity. A hidden village it is indeed, but only a few outsiders know its existence. It is a somewhat rare occasion. You must not tell anybody else about this village, young one. You may visit it, but not tell anyone else about it. Am I understood? Jowa said seriously and Naruto only nodded. The old man smiled. End flashback. So, where is this village? Sakura asked excitedly. Naruto eyed her. North. Far to the north, he said and all eyes went wide. But, Naruto-kun, if we go north, we will have to go through Sanakagore. Hinata said a little worriedly. Naruto nodded. I know. The old man didn't tell me where exactly the village is, but he told me it was north from his house. And his house is north of Suna. So, here you go. A new village which a few people know, the perfect place for us to begin anew, he said excitedly. Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata looked between each other for a minute. Naruto sat in his place, waiting for their opinion. Sakura nodded. Getting through Suna would also let her get a few herbs she would need for some special medicines. Like, the dessert flower, a plant that could only be found in Suna. Hinata nodded. If Naruto wanted to go there, then so be it. She would go through hell for him. Sasuke nodded. He didn't know anywhere else that they could go anyway. Yosh, tomorrow we depart then? Naruto asked happily and they all smiled, Sasuke smirking. You bet, Sakura said. Alright. And Naruto-kun, Hinata added. Okay Dobi, Sasuke agreed. Naruto grinned at them all and it was then that their orders arrived. Naruto's grin seemed to go wider, if that was even possible. Let's eat, he said happily and the others nodded. At the hilltop of the small hill among the forest outside the restaurant, the full moon made a dark figure visible. It seemed to wear a pitch-black robe while his hands seemed to stroke a strange large sword. The darkness couldn't completely hide the smirk that was plastered on his face. Soon, very soon, his weapon would feast. After they finished dinner, they sat at the restaurant for a few more hours to contemplate on their journey. What would be the possible dangers and such? They would have to go through Sanakagore, in order to head north of it towards the valley Naruto had mentioned. If they were lucky, they would get through it easily without having to face Iwa ninjas. But there was a slight problem. After they were marked Miya, they would have to keep their Hite Atesh hidden from plain sight, just so that they wouldn't attract attention. They would also have to go to Suna as travelers, thus reducing the possibility of involving themselves in a fight. Suna was 3 days' journey from where they were. And in 3 days, everything can happen. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.